Councilmember Bragg.
Here.
Councilmember Spriggs.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Patton.
Here.
Mayor Janney.
Here. This evening, I'm going to ask our Eagle Scout candidate, Eamon Garland, to come up and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. You all please stand and join me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda changes, due to the fact that the young man is here early, I'm going to ask that we move item 5.1 up to right after the consent calendar. Do I have any other agenda changes for this evening? Mr. Spriggs?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move the two new contract award items from consent to discussion, 2.4 and 2.6, if that's all right with the council.
So we have a motion. I'll make the motion to move item 5.1, 2.4. Move item 5.1 after consent and take items 2.4 and 2.6 at the end of the agenda.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
Moving on to Mayor Council reimbursements, disclosures, and announcements. Ms. Bragg?
Thank you. I just wanted to announce that I did attend the Chamber of Commerce, the last Chamber of Commerce meeting, where the mayor was present and swore in their new officers. So that was always nice to see when there's new board members who are willing to step up to the plate and represent the business community. Thank you.
Mr. Spriggs?
I think I can say on behalf of most of us who witnessed the 4th of July fireworks that they were a great success, and I'd like to, commend the community members who volunteered their time and raised money and raised a substantial amount of money to reduce the cost of the fireworks to the city. And I also want to thank city staff, including our city manager Andy Hall, for making that possible, and the whole community benefited and enjoyed the 4th of July fireworks. So, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Mr. Bilbray? Mr. Patton?
And since nobody mentioned it, of course, this Friday, were you going to mention it?
No,
everyone's still under here. Of course, this Friday we have the Sandcastle Ball. Saturday morning, pancake breakfast with the mayor. Are you cooking then?
Well, we'll clarify that. The pancake breakfast is an event by the church and the Chamber of Commerce. The mayor's breakfast is Friday morning at 10:30.
Friday morning. Thanks for clarifying.
So, are you cooking?
Yeah.
No, we actually have the folks from the Job Corps Culinary Arts School as volunteers to do the food preparation for this event.
Then, perfect. And then, of course, the parade, which is going to be great. And thanks for all the volunteers that helped out with the parade. And then we have our Sun and Sea Festival. So it's a busy weekend coming up. And, of course, we just had the dog surf contest. If anybody went down there and witnessed that, that was a great event. With I talked to the women. She's at 60, 80 volunteers there helping out. So moving forward.
Thank you, and I'd like to echo that on the dog event, and of course upcoming events, and I'd like to express gratitude to the Kiwanis Club here of Imperial Beach. They had their annual City Employees Appreciation Lunch earlier this week. There was a good attendance from the city, but I think the Kiwanis has really stepped up and done that for many, many years now. It was Councilmember Bilbray was there with me, along with former Mayor Bilbray. It was a great event, and thanks the Kiwanis folks for that. Mr. Hall, do you have anything from city staff at this moment?
No, just to echo your thanks to the Kiwanis Club for hosting the city employees yesterday. That was a great event.
Moving on to public comments on items not on the agenda. Mr. Quisenberry.
We have a pretty wide cross-section of residents of Imperial Beach, and I don't see a whole pile of bicycles outside or skateboards really. I don't know if you rode yours, Bill Brave, but I don't see a big pile of them outside. So when we discuss getting rid of parking, narrowing lanes, anything that has to do with automobiles, let's think real world terms. We all drove here, so let's think in real world terms when we do ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Elmore?
Thank you. My name is Dave Elmore. I'm here to ask that the City Council continue to ban short-term rentals in the R1500 zone. I am also going to request that the City Council step up enforcement and increase the penalties for these rentals. These people are collecting rents of $200 or more a day, so they laugh at the fines and they consider it a cost of doing business. This area is designated residential, and it restricts rentals there to a minimum of 30 days. When we bought our property there 2 years ago, we considered whether or not we wanted to have a property that was eligible for short-term rentals and decided that wasn't something we were interested in. My family and I decided that wasn't something, we were looking for a quieter lifestyle. Then we specifically chose the south end of Seacoast Drive. However, it's been brought to my attention that recently a few individuals are requesting that the city repeal the ban on short-term rentals in the R1500 zone. These people, like some 15 or other homeowners, continue to violate the city ordinance against illegal short-term rentals. These homeowners who engage in these short-term rentals are violating the law, not paying the city's TOT taxes, and stealing customers from the new hotel, whose success is vital to Imperial Beach's future. These illegal vacation landlords are also stealing clients from the homeowners who are legally allowed to have vacation rentals. The illegal vacation owners undercut their price by not paying TOT taxes. I have filed numerous complaints against homeowners in my complex who engage in short-term rentals, but it's difficult to control their behavior because the city code compliance officers need to visually see them check in and check out and have the renters confirm that they are there indeed for a short-term stay. The owners simply tell their illegal short-term renters to say, you need to speak to the owner. Thus, when a city code compliance officer comes out to investigate an illegal short-term renter, they are stopped because of the loopholes in the enforcement of the ordinance. Because of these reasons, I'm requesting that the City Council step up enforcement and close the loopholes so that this behavior can be curtailed. I would also like to see the fines that are allowed be applied more vigorously. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Moving on to consent calendar items 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and I believe we have 2.5. The other two items have been pushed off on the agenda. I'd entertain a motion to approve those. We have a motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
Moving on to item 3.1, I'd like to declare the public hearing open. And before I turn this over to Mr. Hall and Assistant City Manager Wade, I believe that in our agenda package, the executive summary pretty much summarized some of the things that staff has found out more recently. A lot of these housing items are, of course, required by law in our cities such as ours, and all those along the coast in San Diego and even inland have had to adopt most of these. But there were some items that were proposed that staff is also recommending that we not include in this update. This is a public hearing, and I'll let Mr. Hall take it from here.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As you know, the state requires, it's part of our general plan for us to prepare a housing element, an affordable housing element. That element was prepared, it was adopted and approved by the state, and the zoning changes that you will be considering tonight are changes that would make our zoning ordinance consistent with that housing element. With that, I will turn the time over to the Assistant City Manager for a detailed explanation of the changes that are being proposed.
Thank you, Manager Hall, Mayor, members of the Council. As the City Manager stated, we are required by law to update our housing element every period of years. It used to be every 5 years. They have just changed the law to require updating every 8 years. The housing element is one of the 7 mandated elements of our general plan, mandated by state law. As I mentioned, this cycle is an 8-year cycle, beginning 2013 and extending through 2021. It was certified by HCD, State HCD, on February 21st, 2013, after having been approved by the City Council in January of 2013. There was a public workshop as required by state law. We had it consulted with a housing element consultant, and she provided the notice and conducted that workshop with staff. And the adopted housing element includes 14 programs. The basic objective of the housing element is to identify sites within the city to provide the city's housing needs and also programs to satisfy those housing needs. One of the elements that is required under state law is to attempt to remove government restriction on providing affordable housing for all levels of income, very low, low, and moderate income. 3 of the programs, and this is the subject of this hearing, require zoning amendments to the zoning code. And as the mayor mentioned, I'll start off with the first of those amendments, which, after further consideration, is being recommended by staff to be removed from consideration by the City Council. That was an amendment that would have proposed to amend Section 19.42070, which is a current restriction on consolidating lots in our multiple family zones for the purpose or the outcome of having a higher density than those 2 lots, if taken individually, would have yielded under our existing zoning. After receiving letters, and we did receive letters that are part of your submittal package and your staff report from several members of the community, staff did some research into this, and this back in early 1990 was part of a proposition that, among other things, reduced densities in the city, citywide, and reduced building heights in the city, and also provided for this lot consolidation restriction. Given that there was a voter initiative that spearheaded that effort, it was later adopted into the city's 1994 general plan, has remained there to this day. And given the amount of input that we received after adoption of the element and notification of this public hearing and the proposed amendments, and also given the fact that this would have a relatively minor, if any, overall impact on providing affordable housing in the city. The city already has ample sites identified for the development of all types of housing types, whether it be multiple family, single family, duplex, those types of units. So given that this would really have a minor impact on the overall objective of identifying housing sites for all income levels, staff is recommending that it be removed from consideration, and the proposed amendments before you have stricken that from the record. So that's up to the City Council whether or not they want to comply with staff's recommendation. Housing Element Program 12 is a compliance with state law. During the cycle, we consult with our consultant and with state HCD, as well as our local planning agency, SANDAG. And it had been identified in our previous element, as well as this, that from year to year we're required to comply with state law on a number of affordable housing legislation items. In this case, Senate Bill 1818 and Senate Bill 435, it was determined we were not compliant with. And essentially what this provides for is that when a developer is proposing affordable housing, which, by the way, doesn't happen all that often in our city, they may be eligible for a density bonus, which would allow them to get more units than would be prescribed under the existing zoning. Our current zoning provides for a 25% density bonus. As a point of reference, the one project that we've been able to build, new project, in my time here, it was the American Legion project on Palm Avenue. It was by right allowed to build 24 units. With the 25% density bonus, they were allowed to get 25% of that, 6 additional units, and that project was built at 29 units of affordable housing and 1 unit of manager housing. That's a mixed-use project that's been built. The new state law requires and provides for up to a maximum of a 35% density bonus. That's only if you're building a project of 30 or more units. So it's a sliding scale, and that's if they're low income. If they're very low income, the number of units goes down to 15, but those are exceedingly more difficult to finance because obviously they're available to very low income residents. So it's a sliding scale. This ordinance amendment would simply comply with state law to provide the same housing density bonus that is eligible for any applicant statewide. From a practical standpoint, even without adopting this into the zoning code, the state would likely say that any developer is still eligible for this bonus, but in order to be compliant with our adopted housing element, and in order for our housing element to get adopted and certified by a state HCD, this element had to be included in this zoning amendment adopted. And so our recommendation is that it be adopted. The third amendment is Housing Element Program 13, and it provides for a number of other state law requirements mandated by the government code as well as other regulations. They apply to the provision of manufactured homes right now, and basically the requirement in the state is that wherever you allow manufactured homes in single family, where single family is allowed, they have to be allowed. So we're specifying that manufactured homes must be allowed wherever single family homes are allowed. Again, from a practical economic standpoint, maybe in a single family zone they'd be economically feasible. In a multiple family zone where land values are much higher, to buy a manufactured home and put it on a multifamily zoned lot would be almost cost prohibitive. Again, in my time here, I've been here since just about early 2001 as with the city planner. Nobody has requested to build a manufactured home in the city, but that is being compliant with state law to adopt this requirement. And then a similar requirement, transitional supportive housing in the form of what they call single room occupancy units must be allowed in the CMU1 zone. That's the zone along Palm Avenue Commercial Corridor. That would be done with a CUP. So that would be at the discretion of the City Council with conditions to mitigate any concerns that might be associated with that type of development. And again, those are typically an affordable housing scenario and require significant subsidy to get built. The third element of this program would be making reasonable accommodations for certain disabled persons in all housing developments to provide equal opportunity to enjoy those dwellings. Again, that's compliant with state law as well as federal law. And the final is to redefine our definition of senior citizen housing development and employee housing, again, to comply with state law. And so staff's recommending adoption of that housing element program as an ordinance amendment. As a point of reference, in some of the letters we received and comments and phone calls we received, I was asked whether or not other more affluent communities, obviously the city of Imperial Beach is among one of the lower income cities in the county. What were other cities that aren't similarly situated required to do? And so just in the matter of a couple phone calls, all other cities in the county with an adopted housing element are adopting these virtually the same state law requirements: Del Mar, Coronado, Solana Beach, with the exception of the lot consolidation element, which was specifically identified in our city, which again we're recommending be removed from consideration. All other cities with an adopted and certified housing element are being required to meet these state mandates. Again, as I mentioned, we did receive several letters of comment. We have responded to those letters and comment in the process of the document that was submitted for public review. As I mentioned, the lot consolidation item we're recommending be withdrawn from consideration for the reasons I've stated, most notably that it was the subject of a proposition, a community-wide initiative, and also because implementing that particular requirement in staff's view would really have a nominal effect. Objective was that potentially if there was a case where two contiguous parcels with substandard housing on them, it might provide some incentive for a property owner to redevelop and provide a more attractive, desirable housing stock. That was the objective. But again, given the letters and the contacts and phone calls and the rather minimal impact that it might have, staff is comfortable with, again, recommending that it not be considered. There was an environmental document prepared and sent for public review. This is not a local coastal program amendment. However, it will be referenced in our general plan. And again, all the housing objectives or housing programs that we're recommending for approval as ordinance amendments are just to remain compliant with state law, as well as with our adopted housing element, which was adopted by the City Council and certified by the state. So we're recommending that you open the public hearing, receive testimony, call for the introduction. This would be the first reading of this ordinance, and to close the public hearing, and then seek a recommendation to move it to a second reading at the next council meeting. And staff's available to answer any questions.
I have one question before we turn it over to the public speakers. Manufactured homes, I think of those as what I call mobile homes. Is that what they mean, or is that something else?
That's part of the definition. They can be those types of homes. There is and Mr. Nakagawa is a little more familiar with this if you may want to add on, but there are specific requirements, state requirements that have to be met to manufacture these homes, and they're primarily provided for lower income residences, and they have to meet those requirements, and then they're manufactured off-site and brought to a property.
And
It's on.
and if I might add, a manufactured home are those units that were constructed per the 1974 Federal Manufactured Housing Standards Act, and any units constructed pursuant to those requirements should be referred to as a manufactured home. Any units that were constructed prior to that date still use the antiquated term mobile homes, and so that's where the distinction is drawn.
Thank you. Do we have any initial questions? Pardon me, Mr. Spriggs?
I just would like to, before the public comment, ask a couple clarifying questions as well. Since the subject of the manufactured homes is brought up, this would include prefab structures as well?
That federal 1974 law does not refer to prefab or modular housing units. Typically, those kind of units are built to the International Code Council requirements, which is the same code that you would find for site-built housing, and with the exception that those units are actually built in a factory, transported in sections on site, and they go through the inspection procedures as you would for a normal site-built housing. In a way, I mean, in a manner of speaking, for instance, roof trusses are manufactured at a factory and they're brought over in pieces onto the site and assembled on site.
And also related to that, is this something that we could implement consistent with state law, the manufactured homes provision, as an ad hoc conditional use permit approach, or do we have to actually allow it in our zoning legislation?
The federal law mandates that manufactured homes built pursuant to federal code be allowed as a regular house. There is no conditional use permit requirement that would be allowed or permissible under federal and state law.
And lastly, Mr. Wade, you mentioned the lot consolidation provision, and the staff report suggests we need to sort of take action to exclude that, but I don't see it included in the ordinance as has been drafted. So we really don't have a separate action on that, it seems to me. Is that correct?
That's correct. The only action that council would take is if they don't agree with staff's recommendation and would like to see that adopted, then we would bring it back as an ordinance at the next meeting. We took the liberty of removing it from the ordinance because we're not recommending its approval. So the ordinance before you incorporates the state law mandate elements of the housing element, and that's it.
Ms. Bragg, please.
Thank you. Mr. Wade or Mr. Nakagawa, if you could, I have a question about the special needs housing. And there's a section there that calls for removing the constraints of transitional and supportive housing. So does that include facilities like Sun and Sea Manor? Are we relaxing then our restrictions so that we could have more senior retirement or senior convalescent homes? Can you explain that a little bit more?
Normally, where some sort of care is required for the occupants of a home falls under a slightly different category, such as a residential care facility, which then triggers a state health requirement to obtain a license. Where this comes into play is for transitional and supportive housing. By state law, we are to treat those as though they are regular residences. I guess I'm not deeply familiar with residential care facilities to see if there's some sort of threshold that must be met before it triggers a license requirement. And usually we review those once a business license application comes in for review, and then we decide on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, the reason why I'm bringing that up, and I don't think anybody was here on the council at that time, Mr. Wade. I think this was maybe before your time too, but Mayor, you may remember when we had a facility called the Delancey Street Project that wanted to locate on Seacoast Drive, and one of the ways that we were able to not allow that, I think, was through some of our ordinances. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. Mm-hmm. So what would happen in that case? Because that was a transitional kind of supportive housing kind of facility that we were concerned about.
I was here at the time too. Okay. And we didn't have a neat definition that would accommodate that kind of facility or description. And I don't recall that we got much of a detailed description from the applicant who desired to locate at that location. And it was at that time when the applicant declined to go through with the purchase of the property. And so basically the issue went away. But as a result of that issue, the city then proceeded to make amendments to the boarding house definition, which is where they felt it could reasonably be classified as. But the state law since then has been changing over the decades, and we're obligated to comply with those state definitions, and that's all that we've done so far.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Just a follow-up. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Follow-up question to kind of elaborate on what Councilmember Bragg was getting at. So we implement these mandated changes in the zoning, our zoning law ordinance. What controls do we have on developments that may or may not be consistent with what the community wants in general? Do we still have some degree of discretion on specific development proposals if they are Delancey Street or other kinds of developments that the community really doesn't want, and we've got a bunch of people saying we don't really want this. It's not a NIMBY thing, not in my backyard. It's a general community concern.
Well, I'll start and I'll let Jim finish. There are regulations in place that would still apply to new development, would still be subject to city council of that scope and scale, city council review potentially of that level of a number of units. Substantial rehabilitation could also trigger that requirement for that type of review. And typically those units are developed in the higher density, if proposed, higher density corridors, and because our higher density corridors are along or adjacent to design review corridors, there's also design review that could be imposed, and as such conditions of approval could be required by both the design review board or recommended by them and approved by the city council. Whether or not you could outright reject an application for that it could be a difficult proposition, but there is a review level that the community would be invited to, and the council would make a determination on.
Councilman Spriggs and Councilwoman Bragg, I want to make it clear that the discussion we're having tonight would not impact in any way or change in any way the discussion we would be having about assisted living. These regulations would not change the current regulations we have in place. So I want to make it clear that they wouldn't be part of the changes that we're discussing tonight.
And if I might offer an additional comment, let's take, for example, the property near the corner of Imperial Beach Boulevard and Seacoast Drive where Delancey Street desired to locate. Right now you have a series of apartments, and they are deemed to be residential units. Presumably transitional and supportive housing can go in there, but you mentioned development, meaning new development, as I understand. Today we have zoning classifications for the property. Basically it's CMU2, Seacoast, and mixed-use commercial, where the city council has review and approval authority over any new development that occurs there. The western portion has a residential overlay, presumably to preserve or enable single-family housing units to go in. It's exceedingly difficult to imagine that someone would propose single-family houses facing the ocean and then propose some form of affordable transitional housing when the property is so valuable it would make it, I guess, economically infeasible to try to propose something like that.
Thanks, Mr. Nakagawa. I wasn't really trying to narrow my question to that particular site or even to the multifamily zoned residential areas or the commercially zoned areas, but the entire community, because this legislation is, this zoning change is also going to affect the single-family zone parts of Imperial Beach as well. So the overall concern here is based on some of the lead-in comments that Mr. Wade made about where our community is in terms of already having a fairly substantial low-income profile, which nothing's wrong with that, except that we really need balance in all directions, not just in one direction. So how do we protect ourselves in that regard is actually what I'm asking.
Well, again, on the corridors where new development would occur, you would have discretion. There are, if you're talking about occupying an existing single-family home with a supportive type of housing development, which again I haven't seen too many of those, although we do have a boarding room ordinance which does already allow boarding houses to exist in our residential zones. This merely identifies a defined housing type of term that would be allowed under the zoning. Now it doesn't, again, state law is in place. We don't have this ordinance that specifies this. State law does, and our requirement is that we comply with state law. A lot of these things we attempt to adapt to as they come forward. There is the possibility, I can't sit here and say that a supportive housing proposal would not come before the city and not be subject to the city council review. If it was adapting an existing single family or duplex type of development into a supportive housing facility, but if they were increasing density, yes, it would. And my experience with those types of developments is they cannot economically operate without increasing density. And from that standpoint, that would be subject to review by the city council. One unit being occupied by a supportive type of housing where you have an assisted in-house care provider, that already probably is allowed under today's zoning. So the types of development that these definitions apply to would more than likely come before the city council as a review and under your discretion.
Thank you.
I'll now move to some public speaker slips. I'll start with Chuck Quisenberry.
Chuck Quisenberry, 1321 California Street. Between my wife and myself, about 106 years in Imperial Beach. This is a bad idea. You don't want to overturn public opinion. The public worked really hard to bring this to fruition. The people of the city, not the developers, not the people that want to put in another big hotel, not the apartment owners, the people that live here, the long-term people that live here, reject this idea completely. We also morally reject the idea of substandard housing for substandard people. That is immoral as it gets. You have one standard for all Americans. Okay, if it's 1.5 parking places for me, it's 1.5 parking places for you and you and you. That's how we know we're Americans, because it's fair. When you start subsecting people out saying, well, you don't make that much, so we're not going to give you a front yard. You don't make that much, so we're not going to give you 1.5 parking places. That's morally corrupt. Don't do that. It's against everything we stand for in this country, and I think what you guys stand for too. So I hope you get the moral fortitude to vote with your conscience and not your pocketbook. Thank you.
You're here. Gene Hilger.
Hi, Gene Hilger, 1300 East Lane. Mayor, council members, I encourage you to take the city staff's recommendation and vote to eliminate the lot combining provision that's originally proposed. However, if possible, I'd go even further. My understanding is that there are mandates from the state and federal government about increasing density in housing. To the extent that we have to implement those changes because they're mandated, fine. But anything that's not mandated, including the lot combining provision, any other provision that might not be required, I also request that you vote against those changes. You know, there's people in California, in Sacramento, and in Washington that would, you know, just love to see us, you know, increase our density here and provide, you know, higher density housing to solve some of their problems. The people in Imperial Beach don't want that. We like it like it is. We don't want single-family homes torn down to put up apartments or condos. I think we've got a good balance. In fact, if nothing else, I think we're probably overbalanced in high-density housing already. So let's save what we've got, maintain the single-family homes, encourage home ownership, and I've talked to many people about this. Some of them you've heard from. My wife and I wrote one of the letters that's attached to the staff report, so I'm not going to repeat everything that's in that letter. I hope you've all read that. But no one I've talked to, none of the residents that I've talked to, wants higher density. You know, we want some nice restaurants down on the beach, perhaps. We want, you know, 9th and Palm developed. You know, we want safe streets. What we don't want is higher density. That's why we live in Imperial Beach. That's why we don't live in Mission Beach with all the fly problems they're having now. So please, just keep, besides what we're doing here tonight, just keep that in mind for future reference. I know some people don't have a long history here. I basically grew up here, so, I've seen the fights, the battles, and the people that are new to Imperial Beach, let's be a lesson to you. We don't want development. We just want, like the way things are now. We like it low density as it is now. You really can't even call it low density. But thank you very much.
I also have a speaker slip from Friel Adam that was donating time to Jean or Christine Hilger. Would you like to speak?
I'm one of these slow folks, second generation, Imperial Beach. I've lived here for 60 years. I'm 65 years old.
Could you,
I really like the way it is.
Excuse me, sir. Could you excuse me, sir? Could you identify yourself?
My name is Friel Allen. I live at 11608 Street. You can throw a rock and hit my house. I've lived here for 60 years. I don't care what Del Mar, Coronado, La Jolla, or anybody else is doing. I look at Pacific Beach, Mission Beach, North Park, South Park, University City. You look around. They raise their density, and there's all kinds of criminals and stuff going around. You change the senior citizens to the words of whatever it was you stated up there, letting in Section 8s. You got people coming out of the penitentiary. They get a Section 8. You're going to let all these people move in. Trying to change the density is going to make much more of a population here. We're going to have a lot more problems. We don't need the crowded Mission Beach, Pacific Beach, and etc. As far as state and federal mandates, if you have to follow that, you have to follow that. But I don't think you do. This is Imperial Beach. We're not San Diego County. We're part of California. Thank you.
Thank you. Dante?
Dante Palmentuan, 1361 East Lane. Honorable Mayor, honorable council members, city manager. I also encourage you to reconsider and consider this motion to where is it? Whatever the staff recommendation on that. Okay, let me just give you a story. I came from City Heights, and I've seen the density, and I've seen the traffic issues, and the crime, and the parking issues with City Heights and North Park. I grew up in North Park as well, and I've seen what they did to their density and what they did with their issues there. I moved to Imperial Beach, bought a home, proud of owning my home, and I want to encourage you to encourage that kind of ownership for single families, for young families. I have a 4-year-old, I have a 2-year-old, I have a 16-year-old, and we love Imperial Beach. And the reason we moved to Imperial Beach was the classic logo that you guys have right there. That's what we have. That's why I moved here. So I wanted to encourage everyone here as the leaders of our community to maintain what we have. I think we have a good balance. There's a lot of already multi-use dwellings in our city, but I would like to encourage you to keep it the way it is. It's a good balance. It really is.
Thank you. Marie Joyce.
Thank you so much. Marie Joyce, 1340 Fifth Avenue. Out of respect for time, I prepared a statement if I could. My community's engaged me to stand up and embrace the community that for 13 years I've really enjoyed. And my statement actually just reflects the type of community I live in, which is the classic, as Dante mentioned, a classic beach community. Unfortunately, I work for the state, so I know how challenging it is to meet the demands put on by the state. So I just wanted to be upfront with that. But on the most conservative side of meeting those compliance rules is where my heart is today. I enjoy the beach community in its style, and like Dante, when it comes to the density issue, it's really important, I think, to maintain the love and the respect that we have for being the classic beach community and maintain that as much as possible. So thank you for listening. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Nicole Hazelton?
Hi, thank you. Nicole Hazelton. I'm at 1225 8th Street. As a local realtor and broker, I've been working with a lot of young families that have been moving into Imperial Beach for the past several years. And my husband and I have been locals since 1998, so it's been a good 16-year run for us here. We love the community, and I think that, you know, we bought, unfortunately, at the peak of the market, and our house saw, you know, over half of value loss during the trough during 2009, 2010, and we've stuck it out. And I think that we've seen over 19% in rebound and recovery for the market in Imperial Beach year over year since the trough ended, and since 2011, 2012. And so I think that if you're considering creating more density, combining lots and allowing lower income housing to come in, you're really going to put a halt to the increase of the value in the market in Imperial Beach. And with all the gentrification that's been happening and the wonderful new things that Imperial Beach has to offer, I agree with Marie Joyce that it would be really taking away from the last gem in San Diego, the last actual beach community. And it's the only thing of its kind. There's nothing else like it. We can never be a Pacific Beach or an Ocean Beach or a Mission Beach, and we count on you and we count on the community to make sure that that doesn't happen. Thanks.
That's the end of our public speaker slips, and I really do appreciate the comments that we heard, but when it comes to the lot consolidation, I appreciate the city staff looking into that and figuring out that there really was no need for us to do that. The other elements I understand is state law. For those out there, I don't believe this council that I've been on for quite some time has ever considered increasing density in any particular neighborhood. Both those state laws were 2004, 2006. Sometimes dragging your feet works to your advantage, but you can only do it for so long. At this round of going through our element approval by the state, which is required for general plan, you figure that's been over 10 years before we actually acted on it. So we didn't really jump right at this. It's just that obviously, even though we believe we're down here at the very far corner of California, they do watch us. And this time they said that we had to move forward on these other elements that are not, that the staff is proposing we do adopt. But I do appreciate the comments about density. But I know since for the almost 12 years I've been here, we have never, ever really entertained increasing density in any particular place. And I don't believe, though that's just anecdotal when I say I don't personally believe that there's really going to be much push for any of these things. The one projects we've had, we just approved one a few months ago with the Habitat for Humanities. They never even got close to existing density requirements. I think, Mr. Wade, you could clarify that they were lower than what was even allowed by then.
Yes, that's correct. The density would have allowed 10 units. Density bonus would have allowed 13, and we approved 6.
So the market actually drove that, and what's actually physically viable for somebody to build. So, and I appreciate the comments. But Mr. Patton, do you have something to say on this item too?
Yeah, just kind of piggyback what you said. First, I appreciate all the letters I've read, the calls, news article I saw by Hilgers and one of the local newspapers. Appreciate the updated version of this by the staff that jumped right on this and saw that the people back in 1992, the will of the people, they voted for Prop P or Measure P. I supported it back then. I put signs up, and I definitely agree with staff to eliminate this lot consolidation. Program number 11. I do see 12 and 13 are sound enough. with safeguards, hopefully, and mandated by the state. But I definitely agree with the way this is written today. So thank you.
Mr. Spriggs?
Well, I think my colleagues and staff and people in the gallery kind of know where I stand from the questions I was asking before about how much control do we have over these state-mandated zoning changes. And I think we've heard the community loud and clear on this. The community spoke very clearly when it came to adopting our current zoning plan, which was reduced in terms of density and height and from original proposals to what it is now. It's adequate for the future needs of Imperial Beach. We don't have to go to higher density. We don't have to go to higher building heights, etc. We have to choose very carefully the kind of development, including on the prime oceanfront areas that meets the needs of the community. And to me, that's what our job is to stay true to our nature as a community and stay true to our existing zoning and our existing development plans that have been raked over very carefully by everybody. So I'm comfortable with what Mr. Wade has said about the very the likelihood that any new proposals that would come in for residential try to fit within these changes in the residential areas would probably also carry with them new development or substantial renovation that would be subject to our regulatory processes and subject to the City Council's oversight. So, to the extent that that's true, I think we will keep an eye on these and see what happens when we implement these state-required zoning changes.
Ms. Bryan?
Thank you. I've been here a long time in this community. And the most gratifying part of being an elected official is that when you can truly react to what your community is telling you. So having said that, I would like to move this item forward, following the staff recommendation to remove Program 11. I would make that my motion. Follow our staff recommendation, remove Program 11 from the housing, remove the housing 11, I can't even say it. Remove that and follow the two other recommendations that the staff has.
Well, let me first call for that's the motion that we have, but we're a little bit ahead because I have to call for the introduction and first reading of the ordinance by title only with the deletion of Program 11.
Mm-hmm.
Ordinance number 2014-1146, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Imperial Beach, California, amending Title 19 zoning of the Imperial Beach Municipal Code by implementing Programs 12 and 13 of the 2013-2021 fifth cycle housing element, Master File 1060.
Thank you. I'll close the public hearing and we'll have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? I'd like to ask Mr. Wade to help clarify because I do remember, even though it's state law and we have to comply with state law, there is still discretion that the city has on any of these things. Because I remember there was a project before us many, many years ago that might have been senior low housing and the council rejected it. So, I mean, it's not like we have to approve the project. We just have to have this within our ordinances, our codes, and our general plan. Is that correct?
That is correct to an extent, and I'm not the city attorney, and it also is true to the extent that the applicant decides to appeal that decision. But there have been instances where a council can deny a project for a variety of reasons: impact to the community, design, scope, proximity to other affected land uses, so that the council typically has active discretion and can deny a project for those reasons under discretionary review. Yes.
Yeah, so for the benefit of those that I know are here and are concerned on density, I mean, whether it be this council or a future council, the input that you put in for this particular item, if there was such a project that you felt that strongly about that was using these density bonuses or other provisions of this housing, your voice would be heard, and I'm sure the council at that time would try to figure out what was best for the community. So we do have a motion, a second on the floor. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
And now, I believe we're at the point where I have to ask for the, no, not yet. All right. And then included in that motion, I'm sorry, we're setting the matter for its second reading and adoption at the next regularly scheduled meeting. Thank you. And I apologize to the young man that led us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I promised him that he'd come after consent, but I think it's good for you to hear some of the government processes going on. So we'll move on to item 5.1 at this moment.
Mayor, Council, I'd like to introduce Eamon Garland.
Hello? Hello?
Just a minute.
My name is Andy Garland. So how does the...
Just a minute, please.
What?
Just a minute, please.
Oh.
Okay. Eamon is here to propose a Eagle Scout project within your city, which would meet his, if approved and performed, would meet one of his requirements for the Eagle rank for Boy Scouts of America. So I'm going to let him turn it over to him and let him introduce it to you.
Hi, my name is Eamon Garland, and I'm from Troop 53. I'm just here to give my service project proposal to you to help beautify Imperial Beach. So if we get the PowerPoint ready to go. All right, perfect. So here it is. This is the area we're looking at. So there's the address. And so the project basically would be, so, well, first off, let's get a little history of this area. So originally, do you see the parking lot, how it moves into Imperial Beach Boulevard like that? It used to go through that one big giant dirt area, but there was the island in the middle, so if you wanted to make a left, you had to go right all the way around the island and go around. So they moved it past the island, so it's all good now. But the downside was, now there's this big giant dirt patch in the middle of this nice green beautiful park. And so basically the project would be, we'd get some rototillers and we churn up the dirt, make it nice and loose, and then we'd get sod and fertilizer and all that good stuff, and we'd put it in the grass, and it would jump the gun here, and it just make it all nice and big nice park and get rid of the dirt area. So the budget, we here don't have to worry about that. IB Beautiful, I gave the same presentation to them, and they haven't gotten with their big meeting yet to affirm it, but the people there they were pretty pleased with the project, and they gave a good probably, like most likely, that they'll agree to the budget. So for the scheduling, it's going to be over 2 days. On the first day, it's just going to be kind of a small elite team of kind of the older kids, the high schoolers, and they're gonna be the guys with the rototillers, and they're gonna be the ones who are digging and doing most of the harder manual labor. And then the second day, that's gonna be when the whole bunches of troops of little tiny, like 8th, 7th, 6th graders and all of them from the troop, they all come in and they put on the sod, and after that phase 2, everything will be done and it'll be all good. So thank you. So yeah, so I need all of your approval, and we can do this.
Do we have any questions for the young man, Mr. Patton?
First of all, have you ever applied for a Shark Tank?
I've seen the show in passing, but
because when you walked up here and started speaking, I go, "Am I watching TV now?" I mean, this is amazing.
Thank you.
You're animated, knowledgeable. You know what you're talking about. It looks like a good project. I can't believe that area is still dirt. So whatever you do to it, it's going to make it look really nice.
Thank you.
And you're maybe get money from IB Beautiful. I think you need to bump that up to a for sure. You might want to go visit them again.
Okay.
And again.
Yeah. Just use that same voice and
right.
your personality. So
I used that same voice on that presentation too.
Yeah.
So
I could imagine. Now, are you a local here in IB or Chula Vista or?
No, I'm from Burlingame, which is a small district in between North and South Park. It's like Imperial Beach, but without the beach.
Right. Okay. Well, it's just like it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Spriggs.
Thank you for the presentation, and keep developing those presentational skills so you're going to go far in
Thank you.
politics or business or something with that. So thanks a lot. And thanks for coming to us, you and Hank, with a project that's finally going to, fix that area for the, we wanted to see that fixed for a long time, so this is a great way to do it. And to involve kids of all ages in the process, that ought to be a lot of fun and be nice to know when that's going to happen, so, we can go out and take a look at that and lend a hand if needed. And on the funding side, you're young, you're optimistic, as you should be.
Right.
But you probably do, as my colleague said, need to go back again,
right. Yeah.
or at least send them an email and try to get some sort of a commitment that's more right. A little more in writing, a little more formal, that sort of thing.
Yeah, but the deal is that they have their big council meeting where they affirm things, because I gave my presentation to them, but they still have to go to the big giant full IB Beautiful to kind of bring everything to the table and approve this, approve that. But yeah, so we're just waiting for that to happen.
I'm betting on you. So what we're looking for this evening is just ideas and thoughts, and give the direction of the city manager to move forward with this project and get the young man working on it. I think we have that, Mr. Levine. I don't see any negatives on it, so that's enough for you guys to move forward. We appreciate it, and once again, you have your folks here helping us here in Imperial Beach, even from that little island in the middle of town that doesn't have a beach.
We're not blessed with the beach.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And because we were talking about volunteers and beautification, I forgot to do it, and I don't want to take the thunder away from Miss Bragg, but this last week, the Imperial Beach Women's Club paid for and donated a park bench out here in Veterans Park. They've been working on it for a while. I think they were kind of moving forward to a challenge to others that might want to move forward and donate a bench. There was a lack of seating areas for some of the folks that walked around Veterans Park. So, Ms. Bragg, I know you spearheaded that from the Women's Club, and I'd like to say thank you. And hopefully those out there that work for some of these other groups in town can see the advantage of doing something like that. Moving on to item 4.1, declare the public hearing open. Mr. Hall.
Mayor and Council, I'll certainly just turn the time over to the Senior Planner, Tyler Foltz, as he's pulling up his presentation. This is an application to put a new cell tower, AT&T cell tower, down near the beach where the coverage down there is pretty spotty, and they're looking to put it in the new hotel. So I'll let Tyler explain that to you.
Thank you, Manager Hall. Mayor, members of the council, this is for a new facility in the Pier South Hotel at 800 Seacoast Drive. It's for AT&T. The zone is CMU2, and this is an aerial of the site today. The hotel's, of course, already built. And the project's going to include 12 antennas, 24 remote radio units within the stairwell parapets, and 3 separate locations. There's also going to be equipment within the underground garage, within existing storage rooms. There'd be no height increase to the building or any expansion to the stairwell parapets at all. However, they would be removing some stucco walls on the parapets, and they'd replace those portions of the wall with new fiberglass panels. Those would be built to match the materials, the colors, the texture, and the architecture of the existing building exactly. And one of the conditions of approval in the resolution, if it were to get approved, is that all components of the site must be visually undetectable. So they would have to make sure that the material they use matches the existing condition perfectly. At the last council meeting for a wireless facility on 13th Street, it was brought up about street lighting. For this particular project, the improvements didn't lend itself to a rational nexus for providing that, but staff will continue to look at possibly providing lighting on future projects, so that will be something that's continued to be looked at. This is a site plan for the project, and these are the stairwells where the cell sites or the antennas would be added. And the little red marks are where the new fiberglass panels would be constructed. So 2 panels on 2 of the corner parapets, and then just 1 panel on the southeast corner. And these are elevations showing the existing parapets. Again, no increase to the height or width or any of the architecture, but we would, of course, have antennas within those locations. And I guess more elevations from the east. These are photo simulations of the site. They're showing the existing condition on the left and proposed on the right. As you can see, there's no change because, again, they're proposing to match the materials exactly, or not the materials, but the visual appeal. It's just a portion of the walls would go from stucco to fiberglass panel. And again, photo simulations of the existing versus proposed. These are some samples showing where they added some antennas in the past. As you can see, there's a stucco panel on this wall, and then this is after installation. It blends in very well, and this is just showing a context of texture that you'd get on the stucco versus your hand. This is showing the existing versus the proposed coverage. Right now, the red and blue and yellow is deficient area for coverage. And of course, on the right is where the new coverage would be. It would cover almost the western portion of the city. And of course, the blue and yellow areas is where the broadleaf tree was approved last month. So AT&T should be covered throughout a majority of the city. So with that, staff recommends to declare the public hearing open, receive the report, close the hearing, and adopt Resolution 2014-7502.
Thank you. Mr. Spriggs, do you have anything on this one? No. Ms. Bragg.
Thank you, Mr. Foltz. I just wanted to thank you for the consideration of lighting when these projects come before us. I understand that it wasn't possible this time, but I really do appreciate that consideration. Thank you.
I do have a speaker slip, Mr. Kravitz.
I wasn't planning on speaking tonight. Kind of holding back since we started the newspaper. But I do have one question about this project because the city is also deeply involved in the new hotel. And I was wondering, the revenue that's generated from the cell phone tower, since the city owns the property, will that revenue go to the hotel owner, or will the city get the revenue from AT&T? That was my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe staff could answer that for us.
Yes, Mayor and members of the council. The city is in a contractual relationship, actually the successor agency to the redevelopment agency as part of the agreement for development of the property. This is considered under that agreement a permitted transfer. There's a long-term ground lease with the developer, and as a permitted transfer, the developer is entitled to engage in leases such as with the restaurant or the spa, and this would be considered a permitted transfer. We have negotiated a sublease around that requirement, and under the agreement that was already in place, the developer is the sole recipient of revenue from this facility. So the city doesn't receive any compensation. It's simply the agreement allows them to have this permitted transfer and enter into a sublease, and the revenue produced is solely to the benefit of Imperial Coast LP.
So what about property tax?
property tax, the property after the development of the site was assessed as improvements on the site. This will likely have no impact on reassessment, but property tax is enjoyed by the city.
Thank you.
I should say roughly 26% of the property tax is.
Are you trying to say that other state agency gets
Yeah, quite a few.
Yes, and for me is first of all, was there any harmful radio waves coming off of these? I take it no, but you could confirm that.
All health issues are regulated by the FCC, so the city's not allowed to review that.
And then
staff isn't.
Payment was also a consideration, but you answered. And one thing I thought about, that we can't put a street light up there, apparently. So how about we ask for maybe sponsorship for fireworks or something?
When I talked to AT&T, I believe they had some community programs. Is there okay? There's a representative. You want to speak to that?
Fireworks also is part of our community, so you might want to bring that back.
At least we're starting early this time.
Right.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Lim. I represent the applicant AT&T Mobility, and our office address with DePrati Inc. is 13948 Calle Bueno Ganar in Jamul, California, 91935. Anything with regards to any kinds of benefit to the city would have to be dealt with the AT&T External Affairs. I believe you're familiar with Christine Moore. She's Director of External Affairs, and she's happy to speak with the city about, I know that there were some other lingering issues with painting and everything else, and Christine is much more capable to talk to you about those benefits.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Is that?
Yeah, I think I could direct that to the right people, and they could follow through on that.
Absolutely. And if you don't have her contact information, I can give it to Tyler.
Yeah, I would appreciate
Absolutely.
that.
And just for the benefit, I think, because you brought up the 4th of July in particular, but engaging companies as large as AT&T early in the process is probably the best, because their budget's a little more complicated than even ours.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
In that case, I'd like to close the public hearing, and I'd like to entertain a motion to adopt Resolution 2014-7502, approving the regular coastal permit, the conditional use permit, the design review case, and site plan review, which makes the necessary findings for a wireless telecommunications facility and equipment shelter concealed within the Pier South Hotel. We have a motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. Moving on to item 5.2. Mr. Foltz, you have it again.
This is for reviewing a parking alternative for the Imperial Beach Library at 810 Imperial Beach Boulevard, the applicant's County of San Diego. The new library was initially reviewed, the preliminary plans at least, by the City Council on April 16, 2014. At that meeting, the council was supportive of 17 new parking spaces on 8th Street, 21 new parking spaces in the church parking lot. The agreement between the county and the church is still under negotiation, and if for some reason the county and church don't reach an agreement, then a parking alternative is needed so that the County Board of Supervisors can approve sending out the RFP this month. So the City Council tonight is being asked to support approximately 21 parking spaces to be provided from the Boys and Girls parking lot if that alternative parking is needed. The parking on 8th Street would still be combined with the 21 new spaces that would be provided in the Boys and Girls parking lot, so it would still meet the parking standards. We would also request comment on the concept of providing head-in parking on 8th Street, perpendicular parking instead of angled. At the last meeting, we showed angle parking going from the north end of 8th Street all the way down to Imperial Beach Boulevard. The counties inquired about doing head-in parking. That would provide for easier access, at least if you're heading south on 8th, because it would no longer be angled in the other direction. And there's also sufficient right-of-way. Of course, we'd need to see full plans and be able to show the council that for a full approval, but this is for at least the concept of doing head-in parking. And here's an aerial of, I'll show the right-hand side first, of the previous parking alignment that was showed at in the April meeting. And again, the county's wondering about the consideration of doing head-in parking instead of the angled parking towards the south. And also here's an aerial of the site where the library will be expanded, and then the community room, which will be remodeled or reconstructed, the church parking, and then also where the Boys and Girls Club parking would be. And if for some reason the parking is provided at the Boys and Girls Club, it's likely that improvements would have to be made to the ADA ramp that leads into the park, and it's anticipated that the county would be responsible for that, to my understanding. With that, staff recommends to receive the report, entertain public testimony, provide comments on the parking alternative concept, and then provide direction to staff for a parking agreement with for 21 parking spaces at the Boys and Girls Club, and also provide comment on the head-in parking.
If I could just add that much the same as what they're trying to negotiate with the church, rather, this would be as an alternative negotiating a shared parking agreement. So the specifics of which would be brought back to the city council. It wouldn't be an exclusive use parking, but rather a shared parking arrangement, and there is ample parking in the southern portion of the Boys and Girls Club to provide that shared parking reservoir for the library expansion if needed.
Thank you, and I know that there's folks from the county here, including Mr. Murphy from Greg Cox's staff. I think community-wise, we're very, very supportive of a library here. The parking thing, I am confident that the church folks are very well to work with.
Mr. Mayor, just like to point out that Mr. Cox is here as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, Supervisor. You snuck in on me. But that from my perspective, I think the ongoing negotiations with the church where you started are the way to go. I think the church is a great community member as well, and I think between your staff, Mr. Cox, and with the help of the city staff, that we can make something work that works for everybody, including the church. And that's the way I look at it. As far as head-in parking, like you said, I think it could work, and I think when you bring it back, we'll have, you know, we're trying to make sure we provide enough parking is the big thing. So, any other thoughts from my council members, Mr. Spriggs?
I agree with you 100%. I hope that the negotiations with the church can work out. I mean, even if one were to try to accommodate the church's maximum uses during their service hours or program hours, it seems to me that that's really way more desirable. When you look at this map, it's like 4 times the distance to get from the south end of the Boys and Girls Club. And for many of our elder citizens, who may not be able to have access to the handicap parking, that would be quite prohibitive, I would think. So I think it's real important. It's really important to the community that something is worked out here so that there's ready access. This is going to be a great facility for Imperial Beach, and we really do need to make sure it's completely accessible for everybody, even if that means figuring out how to compensate the church in some way, and I know that's all subject to negotiation. I'd echo what the mayor said about if it helps to squeeze a few more parking spaces out by making them perpendicular, then let's do that. That just increases the chance that if something isn't worked out with the church by some small freak accident that's not worked out, then there are at least be 3 or 4 more spaces that are available, more of which could be designated for seniors or for people with disabilities. That's all I have to say.
Ms. Bragg?
Thank you. Is there a representative from the Boys and Girls Club here this evening? No. I just wanted to thank them for even entertaining, thoughts of partnering with us on this. And this has been, this project has not been easy, but it's going to be a wonderful project. I'm just glad that staff is continuously looking for resolution on the issues that keep arising, though. Thank you very much. And I think that the just pull-in parking would be perfect for this project. Thank you.
Mr. Patton.
And hey, I think I mentioned it before. Great idea on this library. Thank you again. The parking spaces, I've noticed they've been getting narrower and narrower. So if we could just keep them like legit spaces where somebody could pull in with a truck. Plenty of handicapped, disabled spaces. And hopefully we get the church parking lot. And this is just a formality. And then my next thing was additional bike racks. I mentioned it earlier before. We ride our bikes to the library all the time during the daytime. My family, we bring tag-along kids. We dominate all the bike spaces in one go around. So just extra bike spaces. So thank you.
Is that where you're asking for this evening, is to say that we'd like you to negotiate a deal with either the Boys and Girls Club or the church, or to facilitate that, right?
That's correct.
And that's all you need from us.
Looking for authorization should they not reach an agreement with the church to proceed with a negotiated agreement for parking, shared parking agreement at the Boys and Girls Club.
I think that we feel pretty much in support of that, and I think that I'm still confident between yourselves and the county folks. Definitely the supervisor, the church will be working with us on this too. But once again, supervisors, thank you very much for spearheading this effort, and I know you'd like to have had it started last week, but we didn't get there yet. So that's it. Thank you. Moving on to item 5.3, Mr. Bradley.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight I'd like to present to you the Tonight I'd like to present to you the fiscal year 2014 financial forecast. I feel like I was just here presenting the fiscal year 2013, so that year went fast. But the reason I do call it a forecast, even though the fiscal year ended on June 30th, we still are receiving invoices and paying bills and receiving revenue for the fiscal year. And so that will continue for a few more weeks. So I just want to preface that this is a forecast. Though I do feel that I'm quite confident in the numbers. We just finished the final payroll. I know what invoices are still outstanding. And so there's a lot of confidence in these figures. I also would like to bring up the point that the auditors that were just here on their first visit of two in the week of June 23rd, and I'm pleased to report that their results on their preliminary review of fiscal year 2014 was very promising. Some of the findings they had in the previous year have been eliminated, and so when I come back and present the final in October, I have a strong belief that we will be moved along and resolved some of the findings they had in the prior year. So it's a very promising result from their first visit. The results of this forecast are we are on budget. When I'm going to show on the next slide and go through some of the details on the revenues and expenses, and we were able to stay within our budgeted guidelines. We did, however, receive some unbudgeted excess revenues, and this was a result of the ROPS 1415A. It wasn't as if we weren't expecting these revenues. It really came from a change in the government accounting standards during the fiscal year, in which they require us now to record those revenues in the period in which we receive them, not necessarily the period in which they were programmed. So that's why it's the 1415A ROPS, in which they said now you must receive them in June, which is when they came in. So in this fiscal year, we're going to have received 3 ROPS periods worth of revenue in the fiscal year, when we were only expecting 2. So we'll have an increase in the budget to actual there. That won't continue on a go-forward basis. This is a catch-up, and then on a go-forward basis, we will just be receiving the 2 periods. We also received a repayment of nearly about 1/3 of the city loan to the former redevelopment agency. So that's not necessarily a increase in revenues or change in variance versus budget, but it will move what was an accounts receivable or loans receivable up to cash. And so we'll have an offset there. So here's a chart, and I would like to walk slowly through it just to make sure that I don't brush quickly through. But this is our general fund, and what I'm presenting is our fiscal year 2014 budget to actual. Along the left side is our revenue and expense, and we have some subcategories, and these are the same type of categories that we as management review and analyze our revenue and expenses. The first column is our original budget. This was approved by council at the beginning of the fiscal year. The second column is the final budget. Remember, we go through the year and we have some budget adjustments that are brought upon by resolutions. Now, we might receive a grant or whatnot, but that's all brought before you. In your in the staff report, I list out these various budget adjustments. The final column is our actual based on my forecast on where I feel we'll end up for the fiscal year. And as you can see, when you go down these different revenue items, we basically are coming right in on budget within a few percentage points. And you know, we expected to see these revenues. I'm really glad they came in, and for the most part, we're right on. As you scoot on down here, though, you see that in our other revenue, we're a little bit short. But after I created this chart, I realized there was still some interest earned that we need to book, and some market appreciation that I need to book. And we had the Chandler Investments come out and give that presentation. So there's some revenue there that I still need to record. On taxes, as you can see, the budget versus actual came in quite higher. I just explained that that's solely due to this ROPS 1415A. On transfers, we also have a little bit more revenue than we budgeted, and this came from some additional Transnet dollars that flowed through the general fund. Transnet's kind of a hard business to budget because it's based on when we're doing projects. If I move down to the expense side, we look at our, once again, budget to actual. And on the CIP, we are under a little bit in our expenditures. That's just because we just didn't complete some projects. And so this will roll over into the next year. Employee costs, we're a little bit above. We had something that was unexpected or unbudgeted for with the closure of the sports park, and when employees leave the city, they have accrued benefits that we need to pay out. So there was a little excess there. On other costs, it looks as if we're coming in quite a bit lower, but in reality, it's not so much. We did come in a little bit lower, about half of that, which is nice. Then there's some budget adjustments that I believe were duplicated and sort of overinflated our budget slightly. So for the most part, this is we did underspend just a little bit, which is good in the fiscal conservancy. I do want to point out that if you look at our original budget and then our final budget, based on the budget adjustments, that you see this jump up in CIP other costs. And what happens during the course of the year, these are these grants. And so we may not have budgeted for it, but we received it, and so we'll come to City Council and get the approval to receive the grant. And that's when we offer a budget adjustment.
I just wanted to, for the benefit of the members of the community and to remind the council, Mr. Bradley has mentioned the ROPS 1415A, and before we get into a little bit of discussion on that, that stands for Recognized Obligation Payment Schedule, and it's based on our redevelopment dissolution. Now that there's no longer redevelopment, we still receive property tax as if there were, and for every 6-month period, we receive revenue in January for the 6-month period from January to June, and for the 6-month period from July to December, we receive it in June. So that stands for that. 1415A is the fiscal year and the first 6-month period of the fiscal year. So for this current period we're in, 1415A is July to December. And what Mr. Bradley has indicated is because we received the money that we're spending on our enforceable obligations, redevelopment, dissolution, bond payments we have to make, we received that in June. The auditors and standard practices now require us to book that in the prior fiscal year, and that's resulting in that 700,000 or so. And so I just wanted to explain that that's what ROPS 1415A stands for, and we have to approve a ROPS every 6 months, and we're coming up on the next one, which will be ROPS 1415B.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I defer to our assistant city manager. He's the expert on the successor agency, so thank you. So as we finalize the forecast for our revenues and expense, we come to a net revenue, which is our revenue less our expense, and you can see that it is a positive about 750,000. The bulk of that is this additional ROPS 1415A revenue that was received this year. If I back that out because it was unbudgeted for, you see that we are forecasting about $60 plus thousand in excess revenues over expense. So how does that flow through to our fund balance, and where do we stand today? If you look at the chart you have before you, along the left I have the beginning fund balance, and this is for the general fund, and along the top are different accounts at which the council has assigned these fund balance to. So we have an unassigned fund balance, which the council has a policy that says that 30% of our general fund expenditures, this should not go lower than that, which is about 5.4 million. So you see we have 5.6 at the beginning of the year. Other accounts are the Economic Uncertainty Fund of 1.8 million, Strategic Capital 1.7, Public Works Projects of 1.8, and the Public Safety Communications of 172,000. During the course of this year, we experienced, as I just showed on the previous slide, net revenue in excess of our expenses of 753,000. So that's going to add to our fund balance. We also received the RDA, the repayment of the city loan to the tune that went to the general fund of 892,000. That will, like I said, will go from a receivable into cash. There are a couple other things that happened throughout the year that were tied to certain resolutions that have a little effect, but the net result is at the fiscal year ending, I'm forecasting the unassigned fund balance to be $7.1 million. I wanted to put this slide up, and it relates to a little bit when the Chandler Asset Management was here and he was talking about our investments. I like to tie the fund balance to our actual cash deposits because that's a reconciliation. It really lets you know and puts it in real terms. If I go back real quick, if we add up the forecasted ending balance for all these accounts, it equals the 12.65 million. So this part of the pie right here is the general fund fund balance, but it's made up of those categories which we just discussed. If you add up all the other funds throughout the city, you know, we have the sewer fund, the CIP fund, the gas tax. All of those also have restrictions on what those funds can be spent on, but they, if you add those up collectively, you come up with $32.3 million, and that coincides with the table you see at the bottom where we have our checking account, our Chandler Asset account, and a couple other LAIF, local agency investment fund account. If you add up all those are physical depositories of cash. They equal what our general ledger is saying belong to those particular funds. And with that, I believe that will be our fiscal year 2014, and I will come back in October with a finalized audited
So
report.
basically what you're going to bring us back in October is after the auditors look at it, make sure that all your T's are crossed and I's are dotted and all that kind of good stuff, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions, Mr. Spriggs?
Thanks very much, Mr. Bradley, for really breaking this down into, I think, a very clear presentation form. I really appreciate that very much. I'm sure we all do. I just had one observation, and then I may have a comment depending on if there's any public speakers. But this is kind of like a household that's doing a good job balancing its budget, and somebody gets lucky at the blackjack table and brings a little bit more revenue or a little bit more of a bump into the family budget. And what do you do with that? Do you sock it away in a savings account or an investment account or a college fund, or do you consider it expendable or expendable? That's kind of the situation I see here, with merely a $60,000 net in terms of income and expense for the year. We're really right on the edge of our revenues and our expenses meeting each other, and I for one am not comfortable with us being that close in terms of our revenues and expenditures. I think it's going to be difficult for us to keep up with escalating costs, especially when it comes to public safety, with a contract with the sheriff that is countywide, that we have not very much negotiating power, and other expenses of operating the city that are going to go up annually. So to me, maybe it's because I'm a fiscal conservative a little bit, I don't know, but I think this is really, it's great that we are positive, but it's almost negligible. It's like this is just a totally balanced budget that we're on right now, and I think we have to look to our opportunities for continued looking for opportunities to grow our sales tax and other sources of revenue to not cut this so fine in the future. I'm not speaking about the reserves. I think that's great that we have the reserves, and when the economy tanks again, we're going to cut into those reserves, no question. But for our balanced budget in terms of what we can commit to on regular expenses like salaries and regular repairs and that sort of thing versus our income, we're right. We're right on the cutting edge there. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to, in your next report, possibly also look at avenues for increasing revenue and saving on the cost side. I think that would be very helpful when you come back to us with the final budget.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I certainly appreciate you doing this great job. I think you really taken our budget and explained it very well. I know a while back when I ran for a city council a year and a half ago, a lot of cities' budgets were, the forecast wasn't looking that great. We're above that. We're not wearing water wings. We're not struggling trying to get air. We're breathing pretty solid, and I'm happy with that. I think we look at in our future. Do we spend our money one time, it's gone, or do we look at investments? We look at investments. We get interest. We get taxes. Then we reinvest that into our community. And I think that's where we need to head. Thank you.
Ms. Bragg.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley, you when you first had your opening comments, you talked about the auditor's first pass and that some findings were promising. Do you want to speak to that a little bit, what some of those findings were and how we're addressing those? Because I know initially last time we had some issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you specifics. There was some questions about in fiscal 2013, when the auditors come, they pull samples of journal entries. Journal entries are what we accountants do to move things around from one bucket to the next, and they pull about 30 or so samples, and in fiscal year 2013, about 30% of them, just in the procedurals in which they created those journal entries, were questionable. This past audit, when they came out, we had one out of 30. So, and that was just a pretty small issue. And so, you actually should have seen the auditor's face after that they gave me the exit interview. They were pretty pleased. The second one was pretty major as well, which came with regards to our bank reconciliations. They had always been doing the bank reconciliations, and I think doing them properly. They weren't communicating them right. And so I've created some standard reports now that my staff uses monthly when they do the bank reconciliations, and they were able to present that to the auditor. And the auditors were like, wow, this is wonderful. Even though we really didn't change too much, it was more in the presentation. But those were just two examples, and I believe when they come back in September, all the other few findings that are still exist will be gone as well. So I'm pretty confident of that.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate your just blatant honesty about. And they were, I think we can safely call them deficiencies, and it was just in some of the reporting.
Sure.
But I think it's important that we point them out, and more importantly, that we point out we have rectified them. So thank you, Mr. Bradley.
I don't see any other comments. Mr. Bradley, thank you very much, and hopefully you have the same good news in October.
I'll try. Thank you.
Moving on to item 5.4. This is a little bit different than normal because it is in a negotiation with an agreement to do something, or perhaps a negotiation. We as a council have not have any closed session items on this, which is normally where a lot of this business is conducted with real property or something like that. We thought it was best that after the demise of redevelopment that this was affecting the city in general, that we conduct this type of discussion, a public hearing. So I'm going to turn this over to Assistant City Manager Wade.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, City Manager. This is a segue, I believe, quite well from the discussion we just had about our city's budget condition and some of the revenues that we experienced from redevelopment dissolution, which, by the way, what I didn't explain was the benefit to the general fund is that since no longer is there a redevelopment agency, money that used to go to the redevelopment agency and property tax is now coming to the general fund, and that was the lion's share of that $750-some-odd-thousand. What I'd like to do today is discuss a development opportunity that has come our way, and it's not one that has come our way slowly, as with government things often do. And it has to do with a property at the corner of Imperial Beach Boulevard and Seacoast Drive, 1046 Seacoast. The property is bounded by, as I mentioned, Seacoast Drive, Imperial Beach Boulevard, Ebony Avenue, and Ocean Boulevard right-of-way. It's occupied by a 30-unit apartment building, although today most of those units are not occupied due to substandard conditions. Looking at the property from to the the southwest at Ebony and Imperial Beach Boulevard, and I'm sure we're all familiar with it. It's called Sunny Shores. Looking to the northwest from Imperial Beach Boulevard and Seacoast Drive, and looking at it from to the southeast from the beach. A little bit of background on the site, and what I want to do is walk you through what our long-range vision for this property has been, and through various efforts by not only this city council but other city councils before you. The property, and some of these are planning objectives, and by the way, I've been here long enough to have been involved in all of them, even in a prior life as working for the dark side as a consultant, was involved in some of this effort, and so my personal familiarity with this site goes back as long as this history, and I'm sure there's plenty of people in this room whose history goes back well before that. The vision plan in Imperial Beach in October 2000, Imperial Beach, the big picture, looked at target areas of the city, and obviously one of them is the Seacoast Drive area, and they identified the absolute need for more commercial development to increase tourism, specifically restaurants, shops, and hotels. In July 2001, our redevelopment project area expanded into the whole city, where previously it was focused primarily on Palm Avenue commercial corridor. One of the reasons it did so was to provide an economic development tool for other areas of the city, one of which was the Seacoast Drive area, to foster economic development opportunities. I would add that what we didn't have in those expanded areas was eminent domain authority. The community and the council at the time were adamant that they did not want to use eminent domain in that expansion area. So while we still had the availability of economic development tools, one of them was not to acquire property through eminent domain. In August of 2001, we had a consultant prepare an analysis for the development potential of the Seacoast Inn. And the objective was to look at that property, and because at that time we had very little financial resources as a redevelopment agency, look at ways in which we could incentivize the redevelopment of that property from a land use perspective, from a zoning perspective, rather than a financial one. And so what we looked at was flexibility in the zoning code, incentives to help hotel development, not just, by the way, the Seacoast Inn, but other areas of Seacoast Drive. In November of 2001, the city adopted an Imperial Beach survival plan, and as you know, our economic history has been one of wax and wane, and at that point in time, we were really looking at trying to create economic development while maintaining, as has been discussed in public comment earlier today, the small town, classic Southern California beach atmosphere that everybody in this council and this community, since I've been involved, has said that's a #1 priority. And so how can we provide for reasonable economic development and maintaining that quality of life that people have come to enjoy here? And one of the recommendations was look at those code changes to facilitate hotel development and do it through a specific plan process so that, as also was discussed, the council would have absolute discretion over how that project could be approved through discretionary review of a specific plan. And in July 2002, as a result of those discussions, this council, or the prior city council, adopted a hotel-specific plan ordinance which built into our zoning code flexibility in a couple key areas: building height, the number of floors, setbacks, parking, to provide a land use incentive, as I mentioned, to facilitate hotel developments within the Seacoast area. There was concern almost immediately by the city council and community members that specific plan process should be enjoyed only by a particular type of development, one that had the most benefit, economic, community, spin-off, catalytic, economic, local economy benefit. And so the council formed a subcommittee to develop what they call the follow-on ordinance, and that was to more narrowly define what type of hotel that could be eligible for a specific plan. And so what we did was we adopted 4 different definitions of hotel, and the hotel definition for which a specific plan can apply would be a minimum site area of 35,000 feet, minimum of 30 rooms, must provide facilities for conference, meeting, or public use, must provide a full-service restaurant. And the idea was that these kinds of things would have the most benefit to the community. And by the way, the Pier South Hotel took advantage of the specific plan process to provide all of these things and was approved for those the flexibility. When we adopted these regulations, it was no mistake that there were other sites in the Seacoast area that were at the time identified as potentially eligible for these standards, and this subject property, 1046 Seacoast, it was pointed out at the time that, yeah, that property is of that size and could support this type of hotel development. In October of 2004, the City Council adopted an economic development plan, again, which one of the key elements was to promote recreation, hotel, and resort-oriented use along Seacoast Drive. Again, because this council had opted not to have eminent domain in August 2006, nevertheless, what we did was we went on behalf of the property owner, we went to the property owner of the subject property and said, we'll issue a request for proposals to facilitate hotel development, and the property owner willingly agreed to do that. The staff did that, issued an RFP to facilitate hotel development. In December of that year, the council selected Miller Enterprises, which is now Eat, Drink, and Sleep, as the preferred hotel developer. Well, I think we received 4 development proposals, and the council directed staff to facilitate that Miller Enterprises to work with the property owner and see if they could facilitate a hotel development. Obviously, shortly after 2006, the economy didn't go too swell. Actually, what happened prior to that is the property owner decided not to joint venture with the developer and decided that they would try to facilitate hotel development on their own. And started developing plans, and then the bottom fell out of the economy, and the property continued to be operated as apartments. I sit before you today with the good news that Eat, Drink, and Sleep, together with Pacifica Enterprises, not to be confused with Pacifica Companies, Pacifica Companies being the parent development company of the Pier South Hotel, Pacifica Enterprises being a wholly separate company, are now under contract to purchase this property from the hotel developer, from the property owner. Okay, I think I just did that. So the property is now in a position to be developed as a full-service hotel. And not only that, but the developer that was selected by the City Council during the RFP process in 2006 is the party that is under contract to purchase the property. It's always a difficult proposition, particularly in a market like ours, which just because redevelopment went away as a tool doesn't mean that the community and the economics don't support that tool. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes developments of this nature on a small site, you throw in other site constraints like a water table that's about 10 feet below you. You need to provide below grade parking, which is costly. You have zoning that allows a maximum of 4 stories and 40 feet. There's only so many rooms you can get in there. The economics, and then you also have a piece of property that's beachfront, and beachfront property still carries a premium. And although those conditions exist in our city, it's the same cost to build a hotel here as it is to in La Jolla or Coronado or any other more affluent beach community, notwithstanding property values, slight property value variations. So when the developer entered into an agreement, they came to the city and they've requested whether or not there's a way that we can facilitate hotel development. And as is common, we've looked at the initial pro forma as a staff. There is a gap in the economic feasibility to develop the property to realize a moderate, reasonable rate of return for the developer. And so we're here before you suggesting that the council consider directing staff to negotiate a deal that can facilitate this project. As I mentioned, with the loss of redevelopment, that economic development tool is essentially gone away. So there's other financing mechanisms that people look to. There's tax credits. There's local agency assistance, which would be local city government. There's what's known as EB-5 financing. That's an immigrant investor program where immigrants, mostly Chinese immigrants, actually pay large sums of money to facilitate development, in exchange for which, over a period of time, they're granted citizenship. That takes a long time, by the way. And also, cities are increasingly being asked to provide gap financing or subsidizing in the way of whether it's upfront property development costs, site preparation costs, TOT rebates. Those are becoming more and more common. We've seen one recently in the city of Los Angeles, city of El Cajon, and in response to that, the state legislature last October adopted Senate Bill 562, which essentially acknowledges this trend. And effective January 1st of this year, that legislation requires that local agencies, local governments providing economic development subsidies must provide specific findings on economic benefit, the tax revenues generated, things like jobs created, both part and full-time jobs created, and then also provides for an ongoing reporting of those benefits. So at the outset of that subsidy, if the council were to approve one, we report what the projections will be, and then in 5-year increments we come back and we report to the council and we make public how well that project's performed to make sure that the subsidy there was a return on that investment, so to speak. So this legislation, in our view, makes it clear that this is sort of a burgeoning mechanism for projects in communities like ours to get economic development subsidies from local government. So what we did immediately, and as again this is sort of follows on from the discussion we just had on our budget, we said, okay, what can the city reasonably provide? And what I'm about to show you, I think it's important to note that much of what you're seeing in terms of initial funding that may be available at the discretion of the council is sort of remnant redevelopment money. It's a mixture of bond funds. It's a mixture of the recognized obligation payment, residual payments to the agency both now and in the future. It's also the city loan repayment, which, by the way, was made initially to foster economic development. So when we look at our general fund budget, general fund unassigned balance at the end of this fiscal year, June 30, as was reported earlier, it's at about $6.6 million. We received our first RDA loan repayment on June 1st of $892,000. The actual payment was $1.1 million by state mandate, by the Dissolution Act. 20% of that has to go to the Low and Moderate Income Housing Fund. So the RDA pass-through that I mentioned, $692,000, was also excess budget to the general fund unassigned budget. As Doug reported earlier, that stands today at almost $2 million. So if you look at the ending unassigned fund balance, this council has adopted a policy whereby a minimum of 30% of the unassigned fund balance, based on our budget of roughly $18 million, it has to range between 30 and 40%. We want to have a reasonable fund balance, but we don't want to have an excessive one. If you look at the minimum 30% and subtract out the difference, we have approximately 1.7 or 1.8 million of potential available funding to contribute to the project. There are 2010 bond funds, redevelopment bond funds, still remaining that need to be spent on economic development opportunities. We've identified 400,000 of 2010 RDA bond funds that could be used for this project. That would be subject to approval on a ROPS, a recognized obligation payment schedule. There are approximately 500,000 of strategic capital reserve, which was initially programmed for alley improvement, but as you may recall, we had at a recent council meeting, this council approved 1.3 million of, again, RDA bond funds to go to that project, freeing up the strategic capital reserve. And the second installment of the city loan repayment, which we expect on June 2nd, of, again, $892,172. That's a total funding currently identified that we could potentially provide to the project of $3.5 million. We have a target of $4 million and $415,171 roughly to make up that $4 million target of upfront money. Part of the thing, as I said, that we need to analyze in any type of project like this, whether it was in redevelopment days or under SB 562, is economic and public benefit. The project that we're taking a look at proposes a minimum of 100 hotel rooms in a full-service hotel, full-service restaurant, coffee shop, conference room facilities. It would improve coastal access, infrastructure improvements surrounding the property. And these are just a conservative estimate of what the existing use today generates in the way of, as you mentioned, Councilmember Spriggs and others in the previous discussion, programming funds that would result in economic benefit rather than one-time monies. The staff is interested in looking at ways we can invest or provide funds that provide an ongoing source of revenue to the city that we can then reinvest into the community. The property today generates about $9,800 to the city in property tax. That's it. With this proposed development, with the characteristics you see today, assuming we can figure out a financial structure that works, would generate an increase of property tax annually of $80,000, sales tax of approximately $30,000. That's conservative. TOT of $400,000. Again, that's slightly conservative, for a total of almost about $500,000 a year of ongoing recurring revenue, which would likely escalate over time given rates and property values and whatnot. Aside from the economic benefits, there's the elimination of a substandard dilapidated property. And we spoke earlier during the housing element update. One of the first things I recall of when I became employed here was the Delancey Street project. That was a very real project. That developer or that owner was in escrow to purchase that property. And thanks to quite a bit of community and city council concern and opposition, this community was able to make sure that that didn't happen. The downside is that not much else has happened since then, and today we have a property that generates $9,800 of property tax, and really today isn't even housing very many people, if any, at this point. The other benefit is a creation of over 100 new full-time jobs, a creation of significant part-time construction jobs, the construction of public improvements surrounding the property, including Ebony Street, Seacoast Drive, and Imperial Beach Boulevard, upgrading public infrastructure, sewer, water, storm drains, providing new shoreline protection at the street end of Ebony Avenue, where there is, by the way, an outfall, improving stormwater pollution prevention, public amenities, parking, conference facilities, and also coastal access in and around that property. What we used to look at quite a bit in redevelopment terms, and it can't be understated even here, especially given the evidence as witnessed by the Pier South Hotel, is what we call catalytic benefits or spin-off benefits to nearby businesses and the local economy. We've seen, just in the numbers so far, a fairly sizable and noticeable impact to the businesses surrounding the hotel up and down Seacoast Drive. This project, I should point out, will carry out our general plan and long-range planning goals by providing the exact type of use that we hope to see along Seacoast Drive in our general plan. And it also would replace one of the lowest or the lowest priority use under the Coastal Act, which is residential, with the highest priority use under the Coastal Act, which is visitor accommodations. And so that can't be understated. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this, there's been a long effort in planning, city council policy, document adoption, ordinance amendments, all of which has, in some form or another, pointed to the exact type of development that is being proposed. And staff has looked at this carefully. Staff is recommending that the council seriously consider this and authorize us to move forward to the next step with this developer, and we're looking for your comments. And by the way, I would like to point out that in our audience today we have Steve Smith representing Eat, Drink, and Sleep, Nick Biancamano representing Pacifica Enterprises. We have Paul Mara, who's representing Kaiser Marston, who's done the preliminary economic analyses that say that there is a subsidy that is necessary to make this project happen. And staff, I would be understated to say that we are excited by this project and the prospect of it. So thank you.
Can I ask an initial question? I mean, we're talking what you call as a subsidy here, and whatever the number might turn out to be, and whatever the council and the community feels is appropriate. That subsidy gets paid back under anything we would do, I would assume, right? I mean, it's not one of those things that it's money under.
Yeah, we don't have the entire any kind of deal structure, but what we're envisioning is the monies that staff has identified would be used as initial funding over probably a 2-year period. The gap, I have to tell you, is bigger than the amount of money that we've identified. And so what we're looking at is a structure where there would be a sharing in revenue with the developer that puts a performance standard on the developer. This project's got to get built and perform to get paid back. And not only that, but the city would essentially realize a rate of return on that initial $4 million or so of a substantial benefit, well beyond what we could make in any kind of Chandler Asset Management Fund. We're talking percentages of closer to anywhere from 5 to 8%. We can't do that in any kind of investment strategy that we've got going on with our regular asset management funds.
Yeah, I don't think I can find that much either. So I do have a couple public speaker slips I'd like to start with, and I'll start with Dante.
Dante Pamantuan, 1361 East Lane. Hello, everyone, again. I'm all for the whole revenue generating thing. You know, I appreciate the strategy in terms of what are you going to get most for your investment in terms of giving back to the city and to the community. My concern is, and and this is a concern from other lifelong residents here in Imperial Beach, is the issues with parking and things with the new hotel. Is it going to be an underground parking? Is it going to be a parking structure, separate structure, more people, density, that kind of stuff? Those are some of the questions that are being raised with this idea. And I'm happy also that we were able to find, $1.3 million for our 14 alleys. But there are so many alleys here that haven't, there's the basic city services and maintenance haven't been completed yet. And then we're moving towards a hotel, with subsidies. So it was mentioned here about the 14 alleys, and I have an issue. Are we going to discuss
That's coming up later in the agenda.
Okay, I'll talk about that. But there are a lot of people here in Imperial Beach that have great ideas for properties, and hotels. Economically, that would probably be the best, solution. But there are people here that have ideas, and I'd like to ask you that you table this and have a public workshop so that people can provide ideas and you can hear from the public. Have a public comment section. Let them give ideas for the development of. That's a big piece of our community there on Seacoast and Imperial Beach Boulevard. And I would like to suggest and encourage you to table this authorization until we can set up a public workshop and invite the public, invite Imperial Beach and residents to submit some ideas. I think it's a fair way to get input from all our residents. But I'm in agreement with generating revenue. I'm all about doing what's best for the community, and we got sidewalks over in my neighborhood. We've got alleys. We've got street lights. Those things have not been taken care of. Those things have been run down, and they have not been maintained throughout the years. So I ask that you reprioritize some of that money or whatever the subsidies and get it in there, with our neighborhoods, with the basic services that the city should be maintaining and providing. Thank you.
Thank you. Chuck Quisenberry.
Chuck Quisenberry, 1321 California Street. I figure if Mr. Miller and his friends want to build a hotel, go to a bank and get the money. Don't get it out of me. Don't get it out of my city. That's business. That's up to you. That's your gate. That's not up to me. Corporate welfare, we don't have enough for the Little Leagues. We cried wolf on that. We're building all kinds of crazy stuff. If they want to build a hotel, there's plenty of money in it, apparently. Let them get their own money. And as far as Dante, that's the most brilliant thing. We're trying to ramrod this thing through. No, we need to take our time. We need public input. We want the perception of clean government, because you won't get it if you ramrod this thing through. Because there's been a lot of election money spread around in this town, and we want to make sure that we're getting an honest representation of what we're doing. Okay? So I would say Dante has a very good suggestion. Don't do anything tonight. Table it. We come back to it. We get more public input, more people, more ideas, and go with that. Because right now we have one side of the issue, gung-ho, revved up, got their numbers, and we don't have anybody else. Not that we listen to opposing opinions, but let's give it the facade. Let's pretend to listen to opposing opinions. Let's table it and move this forward to a time when we get both sides to have some input. Thank you.
Bob Miller.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. I'm just speaking for myself tonight, not the Seacoasters, because this issue just came up, and so we haven't had a meeting since we saw the agenda item. I've been across the street for 37 years, and it is nice to see a proposal come forward. And I guess the first thing I would like to say is, whatever comes forward, this is a world-class site, and it deserves a world-class design. I think that's my first and foremost thought that I want to pass on, is that this is exceptional, and we need an exceptional design, not just a good design, but an exceptional design, a good architect or an exceptional architect. We're so fortunate that the hotel so far has done what it has for Seacoast Drive and the city of Imperial Beach, the increased revenue. And I can certainly empathize with the two previous speakers that there's a lot of other issues, a lot of other needs the city has, but we can satisfy those needs with more revenue. And I don't see this as 2 plus 2. In other words, we have one hotel, we get another hotel, so here's 2 and here's 2, that's going to make 4. I see it geometrically expanding. I see maybe 6 or 8 because they both feed on each other. And this is what's needed. This is I think the best we can do on Seacoast Drive. And I just want the city council, like 2 gentlemen before, take your time if you have to take time on this. On the other hand, you may not be able to because these proposals come and go pretty fast. Pardon me, pretty fast. If you don't, there's a timely mechanism that you have to follow. So anyway, I'm glad to see it proposed, and if it comes to fruition, I really think it'll benefit tremendously the city of Imperial Beach. Thank you.
Thank you. Congressman Bilbray.
Brian Bilbray, 1307 9th Street. Mr. Chairman, members of the council, I have a kind of a personal tie here. Ebony Street's where I learned to surf. In fact, the couple that built this block, actually the gentleman was in the Kiwanis with me, and he was a world-class, actually, scientist that studied seashells. And I'm sure there's a way I could sit there and say that you do this project, you'll be destroying my childhood and all my memories. But to be really frank with you, we have had hearings, we have had general plans, we have had encounter groups with the public since the 1970s. And if there was ever a thing that was a consensus, is that the fact is that this was an essential site for the community. And a gentleman was talking about the sidewalks and the streets and whatever, and I agree with him. If you go to Coronado, you'll see they've got great sidewalks, don't they? They got great parks. They don't have to even talk about charging their children to go to Little League. Why? Because they have hotels that generate huge amount of revenue and give the council the ability to give their citizens what they want and be able to afford to buy those improvements. A long term, not just something you spend short term. And I have to say that this is an opportunity that we've been trying to do for a long time since I was a child, trying to learn to surf down at Ebony Avenue. Well, let me just say that sadly, in the 80s, we had a proposal to build a high-quality hotel, and people showed up and badgered the council and threw a fit. In fact, I remember there was one gentleman who claimed to be a doctorate or something that said, what kind of hotelier would want to build a hotel at Imperial Beach? That hotelier was told, we don't want to talk to you anymore. He left and built the hotel at the Landing in Coronado. And the people of Coronado today get that money for their parks, for their Little League, for their sidewalks, for their streets. You can invest this property and put it in a fund and invest it somewhere else. But here's an opportunity for you to take Imperial Beach money and invest it in Imperial Beach's future. With the added benefit, you get a better return. But more importantly, you get the ambiance, you get the improvement, and you get the long-term revenue from having an economic stimulus that is not only serving the community, fulfilling your coastal act requirement, and making the environment that all of us want to see improved. That classic Southern California beach. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Spriggs?
We always have, whenever any kind of a development is proposed, we have the pros and the cons to weigh. And, I think we have to, as a council, weigh them. But let me just reflect on a few things that I've been thinking about while sitting here, and just quickly. we have to kind of start with, and I'm just going to list a couple things that I think are really important factors here. Our budget is barely balanced. You just saw the numbers. Barely balanced. How we're going to address 5% increases next year and the year after that and the year after that for our public safety contracts to keep our community safe, I don't see it right now. Maybe we'll see it when the budget, Mr. Bradley presents the budget, you know, in the future. But we've got to have revenue growth. I've said this in the 3.5 years that I've been on the city council. Now that doesn't mean at any cost, and it certainly absolutely means not at the cost of our character as a community. But we can be smart about this and figure out how we can have it both ways. We've got a wonderful community. We've got the best location in California in terms of being attractive, having amenities, the estuary, the beach, the bay. We need to make sure we smartly use these locational benefits to ensure the future and prosperity of our community for all of our people. And we've just got to figure out what the best land uses are in order to accomplish that. Second, so we've got to do something about the budget, right? About budgetary growth. Look at the existing land use there. That's unacceptable. We can't have a condemned property right in the heart of our beachfront as a community. I mean, that just can't stand. This is a private transaction. The private owner is talking with another private owner, and we are now going to be big government and get in the way, or are we going to try to facilitate something here? Gets to the next point, rate of return. Could you show those numbers again? Yeah, all right. Conservatively, $500,000 for somewhere between $3 and $4 million invested of funds that are reasonably available and don't take our reserves below the agreed upon percentage that we need to maintain. That's over a 10% rate of return just on the dollars. But when you look at what it's going to do for the community in terms of more amenities for our own people, an improved street ends, jobs, other businesses that will be able to benefit and employ our people, as well as hotels being one of the most labor-intensive operations you can have on any site. What's the alternative on that site? More apartments, condos? Those aren't going to do for our community what a hotel will do, and that's exactly the conclusion that was reached back, 10 years ago or longer when people looked at this question before. I'm all for a public discussion. I always have been for more public discussion, and a workshop on this would be fine. It would give everybody a chance to look at the data, look at the alternative site uses, come up with other alternatives for both the money and the site, fine. But somebody mentioned, I think it was Mr. Miller, this is a private deal. There's an option on this property that has to be acted on. There's a limited amount of time that this transaction has. The question is, do we let this opportunity go by, or do we give our city staff a chance to participate in the discussions and come back to us if there's some way that it can be moved forward, right? Now, I'm not saying we should put all of our eggs in one basket and that this is the only thing that can ever happen on this site. But how long is this site going to be the way it is? How long has it been the way it is? How many, there's a prior history where deals have fallen through. And I'm for progress in our commercial areas in accordance with our zoning that we've fought over, and let's maintain the character of our community, and let's improve the residential areas with street improvements, lighting improvements, public safety, parks, etc. But we have got to have the revenue to do that, and there's no excuse why we shouldn't have a revenue base in this town that allows us to be the best possible place to live where the city can take care of its citizens' needs and not on a $60 surplus. That is not going to work. So I think we need to look at all these factors, but let's be realistic about the condition it is right now, the fact that it's a private deal. It's not going to last forever. We have to empower our staff to be party to those discussions and come back to us with the best arrangement they can. And we got to have more revenue than we have right now. That's obvious. So those are my points.
Thank you. Mayor and colleagues, if you would indulge me a little bit, I certainly would like to hear from Paul Mara if he has a statement that he would like to make as well. The developers here, I would like to hear from them. And then I do have Mr. Wade, get your pencil out, because I do have quite a few questions. I know you're prepared to answer them. I think one of the important things that I would like to lead this discussion through is removing some of the fear factor that we may have, the community may have. So after we hear from those invited guests, Mayor, if you don't mind.
Please, Paul, could you come up and give us, I know you do our economic analysis for us and usually do a very good job, so give us some
Can I
numbers.
ask that you also explain why a subsidy is needed?
Well,
Yes.
I think that's what it's all about. Yeah.
Sure. Good evening, Councilmember Bragg and Mayor Janney and members of the council. Paul Mara with Kaiser Marston Associates. And for anyone who doesn't know me, I want to be clear, we work for the city. We are the economic consultant for the city. So we assist cities in negotiating with developers. So that is our role. And we helped you with the Pure South transaction in negotiating with that developer. So it may be counterintuitive to many people, but full service 3- and 4-star higher end hotels typically require financial assistance from the local jurisdiction, with a couple of exceptions. Established resort areas and established convention center environment. And you don't have either of those. You're not yet an established resort area. You just got your first quality hotel out of the ground. So downtown San Diego, those hotels are not being subsidized. Mission Bay, all of the Port Tidelands, generally those hotels are not being subsidized. But Oceanside, beachfront, at the pier, we're looking at a deal that's equivalent to free land and $10 million for a fairly high-end 4-star hotel. We've worked on Pier South, the Oceanside Pier Hotel, a convention center hotel at the Escondido Civic Center that did not go forward because of the downturn in the economy, high-end hotel in Cathedral City. And these hotels have had financial gaps ranging from just free land, like if the city could contribute the land, it would work, to free land plus $75,000 or more per room. So your Pure South deal is at the lower end of that spectrum. You contributed the land and some off-site. Those are relatively low contribution. So I do want to just convey to you that it's not uncommon for high-quality hotels in not yet established markets to require a subsidy. Limited service hotels, no room service, no conference center, the bare bones, those pop up all the time with no assistance. It's kind of the opposite of perhaps what some people think. But in general, that's not what our communities that we're working with, that's not their goal. That's not what they want to see, and it might not even conform to the specific plan requirements that Mr. Wade was describing. So I do want to mention that we've been involved in just, I don't know, several business days or maybe 1 week now of exchanging numbers and having a dialogue with the developer just on a very preliminary basis so we can understand the general concept for the hotel and the general cost parameters and pro forma projections, revenue projections. So with the caveat that there's no design, it's just a generalized description, a sort of an order of magnitude in terms of the quality and the performance. We've been able to determine that indeed this hotel would have a gap, and we can confirm the figures on the screen. We think actually the revenues are higher, and those are only the direct revenues. Obviously, any sales tax generated if a visitor steps off the hotel property and spends money in the city, that's not on the screen. That sales tax is not there. But the highest and best use for a city for any piece of property in terms of revenue is a hotel. followed by a car dealer or a Costco. But a hotel is the absolute highest best use because you get 10% of the room revenue. So let me wrap this up. But most of our hotel transactions that we've been involved with have a performance-based element, like you do with Pure South. You own the land under Pure South, and they cannot get it back until they've generated a certain amount of TOT. And so you could consider here looking at a TOT contribution so that they only get a portion of what they generate. And I would just add that if you direct us to proceed, we would work with your staff to bring back the best deal possible. We think you have a highly qualified developer. Their Tower 23 project in Pacific Beach is the highest quality thing in Pacific Beach. And their restaurant, if you haven't been there, you should consider their ground floor restaurant is a major draw, major revenue generator. That's part of creating a place that's more than just a hotel room. So I think it's fortunate you picked them before, and they're back. They're willing to work with you, and there's potential for a lot of spin-off benefits. I don't know if I've responded to the various concerns.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Mara right now? Because okay, we're gonna keep going here.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Paul. Steve, would you like to come out and just give us a little perspective of what you're thinking here?
My name is Steve Smith. I'm Vice President of Operations for Eat, Drink, and Sleep. I've been with the company for about 10.5 years. I'm a native of San Diego. My family came here to Pacific Beach in the 50s with the Navy. My dad was a commander of the Navy. And in my capacity, and I apologize, Brett Miller can't be here today. He's traveling back to San Diego, so he can come to the meeting today. But one of my responsibilities is to look at these projects and weigh all the different aspects to say how it comes together for a great concept. So we have some experience both not only in Tower 23 and Pacific Beach, which they alluded to has done very well for us, and I think very well for the city in terms of its return, but also have created award-winning destinations from a hotel standpoint and restaurants. So for instance, they mentioned our restaurant at Tower 23, and we've been open 8 years there and won Best Hotel Fine Dining in all of San Diego 5 out of the 8 years with the California Restaurant Association. So we try and bring not just revenue and hotel tax and things like that, but a really great experience for the people that come to the town. In other places, for instance, in Bakersfield, we took a rundown empty building, the Padre Hotel, built in the 1920s, and renovated that into something where we employ almost 170 people, local people from the area. The hotel does in excess of $11 million in revenue, about a third of that in hotel and the rest in food and beverage. And I think that one of the opportunities you have in Imperial Beach is you have something that's unique for California. You have a disappearing locally based community that harkens to a different age in some respects, but of course you have the pressures of meeting your budgets for the city and those types of things as well. So I think that we have the ability to create something really memorable and great, destination. I think that some of the comments earlier about the synergy between multiple hotels is an absolute fact. When we did Tower 23 in Pacific Beach, people said, an upscale hotel in Pacific Beach and a high-end restaurant, you'll never survive. Well, lo and behold, over the last 10 years or 8 years that we've been there, almost every liquor license that's turned over with a new owner has gone to one that has reinvested in their property. The hotels that have turned over have reinvested in nicer rooms and better views and things like that. So there was a time where people felt like we couldn't be successful in a place like Pacific Beach because it was a college town, a place to go party. But we command some of the highest ADRs in the entire city. We're setting a record this July for the highest ADR, average daily rate, for the rooms, which of course generates TOT tax. And our restaurant is having the busiest year in its history. So we have a good track record behind us. We also have a hotel in Lake Havasu that we developed. That was a previous development that we took over and rehabbed as well. And I've also worked recently at a property up in San Marcos in partnership with Pacifica as well. And it's doing great things. It took a property that someone had torn apart and broken, kind of went Gordon Gekko on it and pulled money out of it and everything else. We're putting all the pieces back together and making it a great property. We just got an award for one of the 25 top hotels in the United States by TripAdvisor, even though we've only been open just a year. We're the #1 ranked, well, we go back and forth. We're on the property in Bakersfield. We're either #1 or 2 ranked hotel in all of Bakersfield, #1 in Lake Havasu. Tower 23 is always the top 10 in TripAdvisor in San Diego. So we think we have a good product. I think it could do something great for the city. I think it creates buzz and interest down here. I think that as the city of Imperial Beach progresses and the Seacoast Drive area is developed, I think that there are legitimate concerns about things like traffic and those types of things as well, which I understand. And as long as I think they're addressed properly and we plan properly and realize the benefit of it, I think it's a lot of good stuff to come.
Thank you. Do any of my colleagues have any questions? I think that was a nice
And just so you know, I was involved in the first development plan about 5 years ago in terms of the meeting space, trying to develop the right number of rooms that are both the high-end ocean view, oceanfront rooms, the ones that have secondary views, space planning, those types of things, and the concept in the restaurant. So I'm familiar with the original plan from 4 or 5 years ago.
Thank you.
It's too early for specifics, but you would imagine that the hotel would include parking on the site for
yes.
The residents and staff.
Yes. Yeah. I think that what we've found in some of the beach communities is that, and we find this even in Bakersfield, is that the average or the typical hotel employee lives relatively close to where they work. So, for instance, we're also involved in Belmont Park right now, and as well as Tower 23, and almost 3/4 of our employees ride a bike, or nowadays a skateboard, or take the bus or some other form of public transportation because they live relatively close in. So I think that we'll have the parking required to handle the restaurant and the hotel. We haven't run all the final numbers on it because generally it's based on the square footage of the restaurant and the number of final hotel rooms. And then we usually incentivize employees to use things like public transportation, those things as well. But we'd like to hire close. I mean, it's people are not going to commute from downtown to come work at our hotel down here. We want to take 150 or so people that are right here in the Imperial Beach area and in between here and the 5 and train them in our way to do good things and be close in. So that's one of our plans.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Ms. Bragg, you now had some questions for staff.
I do, and Mayor and colleagues, thank you for indulging those speakers to come forward. Mr. Wade, I just have a couple of questions for you. Can you speak to the time issue? We've heard that this is moving forward rapidly, so can you, I don't know if there's any confidence, I certainly don't want that to be broken, but can you speak to that issue?
There is a time constraint on the actual transaction between the development team and the property owner. The property owner has, because of the condition of the property, I would suggest, has put in what I believe is an unreasonably quick due diligence period, a period of time to go hard with money. That's a huge risk for a developer to take, particularly considering there's an economic gap that needs to be filled. And what we're trying to do right now is in a public forum present a framework for that to possibly take place and give the developer enough comfort that they're willing to take that risk and go hard with money by August rather, August 1st. So that's a real time constraint. I will say that in terms of this project, I have been involved in this site as a planner and community development director and economic development person for the better part of 14 years. We've had several community workshops. We've had an RFP that went out to the public. We've had an economic development plan that had probably the better part of 400 people attend the first meeting, all of which point to this site being developed as a hotel. So I don't think it's a shotgun approach to this site. I've been personally involved in it for, as I said, 14 years. So there has been plenty of community involvement, and this is just another way that rather than negotiate these things, which is commonplace in closed session, we wanted to get out and make known that this is a project that the community has wanted to see happen, at least per my involvement, and now there's a real private deal that is necessitating quick action.
Thank you. Let's talk about the spin-off benefits that Pier South has created on Seacoast Drive to some of the other businesses that are around there. I heard some numbers that were absolutely astounding. Are you comfortable? Can we talk about those numbers here? From like the Wave Cafe and...
Percentages, yes.
Okay.
My understanding, and I'll just give one anecdote, my understanding is that a restaurant across the street from Pier South, looking at fourth quarter 2013 to fourth quarter 2014, saw 2012, sorry, to 2013, saw a 300% increase in revenue.
Say that again.
A restaurant across the street from the hotel, year over year for the fourth quarter, saw a 300% increase in revenue, and that's with a hotel that opened. The restaurant opened in December. The hotel opened in January, so it wasn't even the full quarter.
Okay, I asked you to repeat that because, again, those numbers are extremely astounding to us. So we can speak to the success of Pure South. And we now have SB 562, which are we prepared to do all that documentation? It's very similar to what we did with Pure South, if I'm getting this correct. Is that correct?
That's correct. And in fact, our initial analysis has already started doing that. You know, part of the requirement is that we have to project, and this is, you're looking at part of that on the screen, although this is very conservative. We're gonna go over these numbers quite, you know, in detail to project what revenues, what potential jobs, and also potentially what the spin-off or catalytic benefits that, as Paul mentioned, for people stepping off the property to spend money. Those are some of the things we'll have to look at, project, put into a report, present in a public hearing, and then on an ongoing basis report, assuming the project goes forward, assuming it gets approved, report back as to how we're meeting up those targets.
So then a lot of that you'll be doing, Mr. Moore, I'm going to assume you're going to be assisting, will be numbers that we are getting from, they're good numbers that we're getting from Pure South. So it's not guesswork.
The numbers we're getting from Pure South are very good.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the property. When was this constructed?
I believe it was constructed in early 1960s.
Okay.
1960, 61, I believe.
Okay, and you said a little bit about that most of those units are not occupied.
That's correct.
And why is that?
We have an ongoing, I want to be careful here, we have an ongoing code compliance action based on complaints by residents. And upon inspection, I believe all but 4 of the units were determined to be uninhabitable.
Okay.
Things right, well, I won't go into details, but...
Okay, you don't have to. But again, going back to something that Mr. Miller said, here's a world-class destination sitting empty. And that is just abominable. That this is happening in our community is just mind-boggling. So when we are faced with this opportunity, I think we can all get excited, and myself included. I had a friend that lived there with her family in the early 1990s, and I went to visit her. And I sat there and I thought, my God, this is incredible. And then my next thought back in the 90s was, my God, this is incredible. It was run down back then. I haven't been in there since. So I think it's time to move forward. So I'm excited about this project, and I hope my colleagues are as excited as I am. Thank you.
Where to start here? The alternatives you've mentioned a little. One, fix it up like it is. Lipstick on a pig. Dress it up. 2, we could have limited, limited source hotel? Is that like a Ramada Inn or one of those limited service hotel? Or we could have what we are proposing here or bringing up is a high quality and proven developer. And from my research I've done on this developer is they're in it for the long run. Not just to flip properties. And from looking at the research, this has been ongoing since 2002. And you've mentioned how many workshops have been more than you could count?
I would say between, I don't know, 12 to 20.
Okay. So hopefully a lot of people went. And
my memory's going.
Gave some feedback. So, and I really don't know too many people or companies that have $30 million to spend to build a hotel right now. But we have one right in front of us, if that's what it costs, which I assume that much, if not more. So a couple questions I have, and those are just a couple comments, a couple questions, would be that we want to make sure we look into is impact during construction. Any delays? Going back to Pure South, we did have delays, and then we had more delays, and then we had more delays. So that's something, if this does go through, that we want to look into. And then how soon until construction or completion? And then how soon would we start to see revenue? for some questions that I think are very important. Also important, we talked about parking, underground parking, but I want to make sure that we have our street end parking for free, the same times that are stated now, that we're not blocking views with seawalls for people to pull up and take a quick glance at the surf. People have brought that up to me. And that we stick to the ordinance created in 2002 and make sure that we don't just build one giant box hotel, that we give them that flexibility for aesthetics value, and that we're not squeezing every square inch to get every room in here. And what we have here, we have one world-class hotel, the Pier South, with a world-class restaurant, with the chance of another one. And, you know, I want to thank the mayor, past council, current council, for the leadership to this point. Mr. Congressman Bilbray stated back in the 80s we had the opportunity to do something like this, and he looked back at it and he would have, could have, should have. And that's the way I see this right now. Would have, could have, should have, or do we move forward and look in the possibilities and getting this done? So that's my viewpoint. I think it's a perfect bookend for Seacoast. It's going to stretch out Seacoast. It's going to synergistically bring in revenues that we could put back in our community, and I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Mr. Bilber? Just a couple comments. Excuse me. Of course, I agree with all my colleagues up here. You know, this is something that when I was running, I was telling people I wish we could get going. You know, I might not have lived here for 50, 60 years, but I've lived here my entire life since my parents brought me home from Coronado 29 years ago. And it's pretty safe to say that when we're talking 30, 40 years down the road, I'm probably going to be the only one sitting up here still around. So, you know, we don't live in a democracy, we live in a republic. We're still elected to listen to everybody, but the bottom line is we still have to do what's best, what we feel is best for our community. And, you know, I originally ran because I was afraid that Imperial Beach wasn't going to be around. You know, everybody's afraid of change. We've really got to, you know, we had to increase revenues. We were struggling there for a little bit. And, you know, if we do not change, if we do not get projects like this going that bring so much revenue into our city, we won't have an Imperial Beach for my kids, my grandkids to call it a city of their own. We'll be absorbed by San Diego, and you look at our neighbors to the east and see exactly what we've become. You're worried about becoming PB, I'm worried about becoming South San Diego. So this is exactly what we need to move on. You know, we're elected to do what we feel is best, and this is absolutely the best thing for our city.
Thank you. And I also agree with my colleagues here, but more importantly, it's an opportunity. We're not blessing this opportunity right now. What we're being asked to do is give a strong support if possible, but also to direct staff to come back with something that will work, not just for the city of Imperial Beach, for the developer as well, but for the people that want to consider visiting Imperial Beach in the future, those that there's just so much good potential here. The tight time frame, you know, we wish we didn't have to be there. I agree with Mr. Bilbray. I mean, that's what we're here for, is to make these tough decisions once in a while. We're not making a final decision this evening. What we're doing is directing staff to make a deal with these folks if it's possible, with the idea that we do know that there might be a subsidy involved. But from what I understand from Mr. Wade and having further conversations with Mr. Hall, is that this will be money that we will recoup. And it's definitely going to be better than what Mr. Bradley can do for finding for investments out there for the monies that we do have. So I think it's a win for everybody. I really do believe that this particular group of people are going to put a product together that might even make Pier South look like they should have spent a little more time designing it. I've talked to our colleagues from San Marcos. They are thrilled with the project that they got in San Marcos, something that was not very good for San Marcos at all. But the new one that these folks put together, they're thrilled with it. Same with the colleagues in Bakersfield. Talk to them. They can't believe what their project brought to downtown Bakersfield. I'm not familiar with the one in Lake Havasu at all, but these are the type of folks that bring quality to an area. And I believe that we all have enough pride in our community that that's what we're looking for, is something that's really quality and maybe even iconic in this case. So Steve, I know Brett couldn't be here. I wish we didn't have to give you a subsidy and you would just start building right now, but I do understand the economics, and I appreciate Paul's efforts to explain to us why. And I'm very confident that if they're able to come up with something that looks like it'll work for the city of Imperial Beach, between our staff, with the help of Paul Mara, and definitely the cooperation of the Eat, Drink, Sleep folks, that perhaps Imperial Beach will get something that'll really make a bookend to their Seacoast Drive and take care of all those other concerns, whether it be parking or other things like that. I think they've heard us this evening. They've heard some of the community this evening. I think from what they even did over there in Pacific Beach, they listened to the folks around them. So I think that's important. I think that we have enough here. If Mr. Hall is comfortable, is that the direction you're looking for from us here?
Yeah, I just want to make, if I could, Mayor, just a real quick couple of comments. And I think Paul could help me with this if necessary. There are other ways to balance these economic shortfalls. However, I think what we're trying to do is strike that balance between what our community wants, which is rather than build a 10 or 15-story hotel, we've asked that it stay at 40 feet. And so that limits the ability to recoup the revenues necessary to get funding for this type of a project. And I think there was a question about parking, and we do want to make sure it's all parked on site, and that's going to require subterranean parking, which of course next to the beach is rather expensive, but it's important for the quality of our community. So again, I hope what we're trying to do is strike a balance between providing and helping this project meet reality with what our community has told us they want. They don't want high buildings, they want ample parking. So we're trying to strike that balance between the community needs and the economic realities of this project. The other thing we talked a little bit was about timing. It's unfortunate that we haven't had an altogether supportive landowner, but through the years, for quite some time, that's why this property has ended up in the condition that it is because we haven't had an altogether supportive landowner. Probably is a good person, but his priority may not be Imperial Beach. My guess is that he owns several properties, and this may not be a high priority property. But I was trying to sit here, and because I knew the mayor would ask the question, is that what we're looking for? I think it's important to also note, one last thing, it's important to note that the funding that we have identified, because it was brought up as well, there are other needs in the community, and we wanted to make sure that if we're going to present any funding to the city council, that funding be funding that's outside of the monies that you've already set aside for other capital projects, whether that is lighting or alleys or, there's a long list of priorities that you put together, and we've put together a 2-year implementation schedule for those. So I want to make sure that you understand we are not taking any monies from those pots. They are still assigned to those projects that you identified a few months ago. So certainly we're talking about a hotel here, but I think one of the things we really need to think about, at least from a management perspective, if we put Greg's community development aside and we put, Doug's administrative services and Jackie's city clerk aside, and just from a pure management, and what I would like to ask the council for is, what we're looking for, at least from a management perspective, is to invest one-time money that can increase base revenues and realize a higher rate of return than we project for our other investments. That's essentially what we're asking for. We're going to have to appropriate this money that's coming in from the state right now, and what I would like to see is that we make a wise investment, and hopefully we do that in a way that if we cannot bring back to the council, I understand this is about a hotel, but if we set that aside, if staff cannot bring back to you a funding scenario that allows us to invest that one-time money and bring a higher rate of return that we could have gotten somewhere else, then that's not a very good decision to be made for our community. So that's the goal. So to answer the mayor's question, that's what we're hoping for, is for the council to direct us to accomplish that goal by investing in this project.
Well, I guess you didn't hear. The idea was to put the money there and make more money than what Doug's making right now.
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly. Right on.
you know, I know that the economy is what it is, but 1% or less than is not a good investment. So, but I mean, I really think that if you look at it, a lot of this is tied to redevelopment. That was what redevelopment was all about. It's just we have to do it, whether it be using the AB 562 method or whatever methods that you can negotiate between the staff, the developers, of course, with the help of Palmera, and bring us back something. But it's got to be something that looks like we're doing better all the way around. I think that should be enough. That what you presented was ways that our money was coming right back. It might take a few years, but we would get it back at a better rate than what we've got out there now. And that's, I think, what we want. So hopefully that's good enough direction. Hopefully for Steve and yourself and Brett and everybody that from this council's perspective, we want you to try to make this deal work for us. So thank you. We have 2 items that were pulled from consent. I'll start with item 2.4. Mr. Hall.
Councilman Spriggs talked to me a little bit before the meeting, and he was hoping that we could get an explanation of the professional services agreement that we are looking to sign. And what has happened here is that the engineer that previously worked for Atkins Engineering has left that firm and gone to a new firm. And we need to update the plans, the engineering plans for the alleys. And this is the person who prepared those plans, and we believe that there'll be some economies of scale in changing engineering firms to have this engineering firm update those plans for the alleys that have been identified in the staff report. And so we're looking for approval of the city council to approve that contract.
Mr. Spriggs, were you looking for a full staff report on this, or do you have specific questions on it?
I did have big questions because I understand we want the person, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the firm that comes along with the person is in our best interest in terms of what their rates are, their overhead, etc. So I was just concerned that we not sacrifice funding in order to keep the same engineer the same city engineer on the project. So could you talk a little bit about what the comparison is between the prior arrangement and the current arrangement?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll turn the microphone over to Hank, who may be able to give you the specifics. But one of the things we anticipate is that the engineering on this project will be cheaper with the new firm than it would have been with the previous firm. But I'll let Hank talk about the specifics if you have those.
The schedule of wages that were negotiated with Atkins are effective with this the same wage scale, if you will, as with NV5 as we had with Atkins. There's no change in costs.
I do have a couple speaker slips on this item, so I'll ask Mr. Quisenberry. No. Dante?
Dante Babantuan, 1361. East Lane. Hello, everyone, again. Great transition, I think, carrying it up from the hotel project. I think that with the subsidy that's been identified as additional funding for the hotel, I'm all in favor of the hotel. That's the greatest investment in generator for Imperial Beach. But I was looking at this chart, and I just had a question for Hank. I had left a phone call for you, and you never returned my call, so that's why I'm up here asking the question. There's been 30 alleys identified. 14 of them are going to be initial. Will all of the alleys be done, the ones that have been identified, the 30 of them?
I'm going to answer that for Mr. Levine.
Okay.
Because I believe, and I don't want to speak for my colleagues here, we have this concept of trying to get the alleys done. We can't do it necessarily all at one time. Our original thing under previous alley things was we asked the property owner to pay for it. This council took the step, which was a pretty major step, and I hope that gentleman back there doesn't say anything, or the young lady back there either, because they're not really necessarily in favor of us paying for it versus the property owners. We might not be able to get to the next set for a while, but I would assume that this council or future councils are going to still have the same goal, is to get to those alleys eventually.
Right. Okay, so.
And Mr. Bill
Just
Bray.
to add on to that, we also have a policy in place where you can move your alleyways up if you want to contribute for the next group of alleyways to be paved as well.
Right. So my neighbors on East Lane and Connecticut, and they were here earlier, and you know, we're the only ones in Seaside Point that don't have paved alleys. It's all been potholes and mud, and it attracts cars dumping furniture, and it's a safety issue.
I understand it, and what we had to do is go through a process. And if you'd watched the process there was an evaluation process, criteria. There was a team that was actually done so that they could professionally look at what way it is. Certain alleys came to the top first, and perhaps the next phase, whether it be the alley you're talking about or somebody else's alley, might be the next top alley on the list.
Right.
I can't predict what that would
Right.
be. I don't think Mr. Levine
And
can
that's
yet.
that's limited because of the funding. We don't have the money to do all 30
Funding and
alleys.
commitment for us, you know, balancing where our resources go. But I personally believe that if it was this council and we had another chance at it, we would move forward on more alleys, and I would hope future councils would do the same thing. It's just getting there and balancing all the other needs. You mentioned things like lighting and everything else.
Yeah,
so
there's a lot of
it's a
lot of
balance.
things throughout the city, and I'm okay with that. You know, as long as the entire city benefits from, getting the capital improvement projects done. But my neighbors, I was wanting to ask Hank, is there a way that we can come together and do something?
That's what he said.
I'm sorry. I have
We will get back. Mr. Hall, if we could
law.
send him, if we could send the gentleman our policy on how everything's done with the city for alleyways.
I think in
Appreciate
that policy, sir, that you'll find that there are ways that you can help on that too.
Okay.
Take a look at it.
Dante, if you'll leave your contact information with Mr. Villa there, he'll get it to me, and I'll make sure to get you that information.
Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Mr. Spriggs, or Ms. Bragg, Mr. Patton, do you have anything on this item? No? I'm sorry, I didn't clear my thing here. So what we have on item 2.4 is the approval of the award as stated in the staff report.
I move approval.
We have a motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
Item 2.6. Once again, Mr. Spriggs, you asked for this one. I think it would be easier if we find out what you were asking for versus, unless you want the full report on that.
Primarily, the reason I asked this to be pulled is very similar. We have a substantial amount of funds that are going to be awarded for a new contractor, and in the interest of just keeping everything transparent with the public, I thought it would be better to pull an item where there's going to be an allocation for a new contractor, a new award that's going to be 6 figures, that we should just have a public discussion and allow the presentation to be made, or even an abbreviated presentation, and any council members who have questions can ask them. That's the reason.
So I think Mr. Spriggs is willing to listen to an abbreviated staff report, Mr. Levine.
But this is a project that you saw and awarded in December of 13, and the contractor that was assigned that, or the one that award was delayed because of infrastructure from SDG&E that had to be redone. That delayed their start of work to the point where they moved on to other tasks and are no longer interested in performing this work. And so we re-advertised, and I think, to my surprise, the low bid was only $1,000 more than what you awarded in December. So we got a very competitive bid, I think, and I'm very pleased with what we got out of it. And the infrastructure relocation from SDG&E is now done, and we're ready to move forward.
I guess one of the thoughts that I had that it'd be good if you could shed some light on it, Mr. Levine, is the first contractor walked away from this without doing any work. And is there anything associated with this project that could give rise to the same kind of problem happening again with this contractor, or was it specific to that contractor's capability, and have we made sure that we're not going to have the same problems in terms of contractor capability that we had before?
Yes, sir. I didn't explain it well first time. In Granger Street, SDG&E had a gas line down through that street that was 6 inches below the surface of the street. When we redo this street, we're going to go down more than 6 inches. And SDG&E's current code for gas lines is supposed to be 3 feet deep. So they knew, SDG&E knew this project was coming up. They identified the gas line problem back in August of 13, but they chose not to do anything until after the contract was awarded. And so once it was awarded, they said, oh, you can't do that street until I move the gas line, and we're not ready to move it. So it took till the end of March to get it moved, and by that time the contractor was moved on to other jobs, and they're not interested in coming back. I didn't want to put a finger on anybody, but I've just done that.
You were forced. Okay, thank you, Mr. Levine. I appreciate that.
So there should be no other interference at this point.
With that, unless anyone else has questions, Mr. Mayor, I'd move that we approve this item.
I would second that motion.
Mr. Mayor. I'll need an oral vote. Did you lock and submit?
We will take an oral vote. All in favor? Aye. Any nays, abstentions? Not seeing any.
Motion carried unanimously.
The city manager can verify it's stuck.
It's stuck, Jackie. I touched. You said.